Chapter 303. Stupid girl, why didn't you tell me such an important thing earlier? As soon as the two returned to the jade courtyard and closed the door, Zheng Zumo slapped Xiao Chui's butt hard. Xiao Chui covered her butt and said pitifully, "I was worried that Miss wouldn't agree." She secretly stuck out her tongue and I didn't care at all. Who asked them to gossip all day long? This time, she finally shut everyone's mouth. Don't make your own decisions in the future. Zheng Zumo glared at her angrily. At this moment, she secretly rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately, she had redeemed her freedom before this. If it had been a few hours later, her mother wouldn't have agreed to let her leave. "Miss, what should we do now?" Xiao Chui rubbed her butt and asked. "What else can we do?" Zheng Zumo glared at her and said, "Hurry up and pack up. We'll leave from the back door." "Where to?" Xiao Chui asked doubtfully. "Let's get out of here first." Zheng Zumo replied and began to pack up. She was entangled by those people and didn't rush back until the end of the banquet. She had to leave as soon as possible. Otherwise, when tonight's event spread, she wouldn't be able to leave even if she wanted to. During the top beauty competition, such information was extremely sensitive. A certain scholar offered a poem to the top girl. A certain young man spent a lot of money to win a beauty smile. The news spread so fast that it was hard to imagine. Within an hour, even a notice might be posted. Seeing Xiao Chui carry out a big box, Zheng Zumo said grumpily, "Pick something valuable. Don't bring anything worthless. Remember, don't forget your secret stash of money hidden under the bed." At this time, in a certain room in the attic, the madam of the jade courtyard was counting her little treasury. Each piece of jewelry shone with a charming radiance under the light. She counted and wiped the silver, and the smile on her old face never stopped. When Meow Meow won the title of top beauty, the future wealth would come rolling in. "Mom," suddenly an anxious voice came from outside the door. The madam's expression changed. She hurriedly covered the things on the bed with a blanket and walked over to open the door. She frowned and asked, "Why are you panicking? Have you forgotten the rules I taught you?" "Mom, there are a lot of people at the entrance of our jade courtyard," the woman outside said breathlessly. "Many people?" The madam locked the door from the outside and followed her downstairs. From afar, she could hear commotion outside the door. A few servants blocked the door from the inside, and a series of knocking sounds came from the outside. "Are these people Meow Meow's admirers?" the madam murmured. She could only think of this possibility. She strode over and said, "Hurry up and open the door. We're doing business. How can we lock our customers outside?" He kicked the legs of the servants a few times and opened the door. After taking a look outside, he immediately closed the door and hurriedly said, Quickly close the door. Don't let them in." Seeing the dense crowd outside, the brothel keeper's face turned pale. How could this be considered a customer? If so many people rushed in at once, it would be more than enough to tear down the jadeite courtyard. Voila! Everyone was originally crowded at the door. Seeing the closed door suddenly open, how could they let it be closed again? With a crash, they all rushed inside. Before they rushed in, the brothel keeper had already scrambled up the stairs. Her forehead was covered in cold sweat. Were these people really here to tear down the jadeite courtyard? Were the officials? Why hadn't the damn officials come yet? As if hearing the call of the brothel keeper, a sudden shout came from outside the door. More than 10 bailiffs all unsheathed their weapons and blocked more people outside. Lu Yi walked in with his waist saber in hand. He frowned and asked, "What's going on? Why are they all here?" Ever since he heard from his subordinates that there were hundreds of people blocking the entrance of the jadeite courtyard, Lu Yi hurried over, thinking that there was a riot. He even sent someone to inform the soldiers stationed in the city. However, when he came here, he found that things didn't seem to be what he thought. "I heard that Miss Zuamo of the jadeite courtyard is devastatingly beautiful. She is a rare beauty in the world. Madam, why don't you invite her out and let us have a look?" Someone in the crowd said loudly. Immediately, the majority of the people in the crowd agreed with him. "We came here because of her reputation. We want to see what the Jade Pool Fairy looks like." "Nonsense. She is obviously the Luo Shui Fairy. If there really is such a wonderful person in the world, of course we have to see her. The bailiffs' faces were filled with astonishment. Mother asterisk her. So many people had made such a scene just to see a woman. My lord is really clever. He even predicted this kind of thing. Thinking of what the county commandant said to him before he left, Louis's heart suddenly had more respect for him. Zuamo, Jade Pool Fairy, Luo Shui Fairy? The brothel keeper of the Jadeite courtyard, who didn't know what happened, looked confused. She was the one who asked Zuamo to attend the banquet tonight. Could it be that something happened at the banquet? Go and ask Zuamo to come out. Now is not the time to be curious. The brothel keeper hurriedly ordered a servant. If Zuamo didn't come out, the Jadeite courtyard might really be destroyed by them. The servant hurriedly ran to the backyard. After a while, he ran back with a pale face and said in a trembling voice, Miss Zuamo, gone. Gone? The brothel keeper murmured. Seeing that the people below had gradually retreated from the hall under the persuasion of the officials, she couldn't help but feel a little relieved. Zuamo had already redeemed herself. She could leave whenever she wanted. The first thing now was to figure out what happened. If these people came every day, how could they do business? Seeing Chun Miao Miao coming in from outside, the brothel keeper hurriedly greeted her. After a while, after Chun Miao Miao told the cause and effect of the matter, the brothel keeper looked dull, her old face was pale, and her legs were weak. She held onto the wall to barely stand. In other words, they really just wanted to see Zuamo. Someone wrote more than 10 excellent poems for Zuamo. If she goes to compete for the top spot now, the probability of success is more than 50%. The brothel keeper closed her eyes and murmured. Just now, she used 1,000 taels to redeem herself. Oh my God, what sin have I committed? She seemed to see a huge mountain of gold gradually leaving her. She wanted to use a knife to cut off a piece of her heart. She was filled with regret, and then she fainted. Zuamo redeemed herself? Hearing this news, Chun Miao Miao's face immediately filled with ecstasy. Since she no longer belonged to this line of work, no matter how famous she was, she had no right to compete for the top courtesan. On the contrary, because of her, the Jadeite courtyard became more famous. Perhaps she could also benefit a little. Tonight, the Jadeite courtyard was destined to be the liveliest place in Qing and Prefecture. No one knew that just as the gate of the Jadeite courtyard was blocked so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through, two handsome young masters carrying bags walked out from the back door of the Jadeite courtyard. They went around to the front door and swaggered past the crowd. Chapter 304. It's been 6 days. Xiao Huan sat in the yard and habitually counted her fingers and muttered to herself. Son-in-law and second miss have been walking for 6 days. They should be arriving in the capital soon. Yesterday, the Lantern Festival had passed. Miss took her to the street to see the lanterns. When they came back, they bought a few beautiful lanterns to hang in the room. If son-in-law was here, he wouldn't have to spend money to buy them. The person who sold the lanterns said that as long as he guessed the riddles, he could take the lanterns back. Son-in-law was very good at guessing riddles. He would definitely lose money. There was some noise outside. She heard it in the yard just now. It seemed that Uncle Fong and the others went to the brothel yesterday when Aunt was not at home. When they came out, they were caught on the spot by the Andes who came back from the temple. Last night, the house was noisy all night. Early in the morning, they could see the brooms raised high in the yard next door. A figure suddenly jumped in from the door. Fong made a shushing gesture to Xiao Huan and whispered, "I'll hide here. Don't tell your aunt." As he spoke, he quickly flashed into the storage room. Xiao Huan sighed. Uncle Fong was such an honest person. Why did he like to go to such an unscrupulous place? She pouted in the direction of the storage room to Aunt Fong, who was chasing from outside. Lying on the rocking chair, it was very comfortable. No wonder son-in-law liked to lie on it before. There was a scream from the room. A figure rushed out of the room and crawled out of the yard. Aunt Fong hurriedly chased after him with the broom in her hand. In the yard next to Rui Square, several long tables were put together. On the table was a huge canvas. A woman in a humble dress, with a wooden hairpin in her hair, was holding a brush in her hand. The tip of the brush was moving on the canvas. The painting in front of her was more than half finished. The scenery was vivid. A tall tower stood on Lonely Mountain. Huge waves thousands of feet high swept from the front, as if they were going to drown the whole mountain. This was a scene from the Legend of the White Snake, which was the most popular play in recent days. It was called The Flooding of Jinshan. The mountain was so majestic that it looked like it was about to come out of the canvas. The water was so strong that it looked like it was going to surge out of the canvas. From afar, it was very shocking. Wan Ruoqing walked out of the room, shook her head, and said, "You can keep your composure. There are people out there who are willing to pay 3,000 taels of silver just to see you. Even a portrait can be sold for more than 100 taels of silver. Why do you work so hard for a few dozen copper coins?" It's different. After standing for a long time, Zheng Zumo twisted her sore waist and said, "I don't care. You promised to take me in anyway. You can't go back on your word now. Your fame has already spread out of Qing and Prefecture. Everyone knows about the goddess of Luo Shui. The Song of a Beauty and the Ode of the Goddess of Luo have been passed around and copied by countless people. It is said that the price of the paper in Qing, in Prefecture, is 10% higher than usual." Wan Ruoqing looked at her and teased. Who would have thought that the goddess of Jade Pool and goddess of Luo Shui that everyone in Qing and Prefecture knows about is such a scoundrel? What goddess of Luo Shui? It's all his fault. A trace of embarrassment appeared on Zheng Zumo's face. Every time she heard others recite these lines, she couldn't help but think of that night when she was honest with him. Once the Luo Shin Fu was released, her fame grew even greater than before. The matter of the number one scholar of Qing and Fu composing a poem for a beauty also became a legend. As long as it was a woman, there was no one who did not envy her. Those poems would definitely be passed down. Whenever it was mentioned in the future, Zheng Zumo's name would also appear. She had truly become famous throughout the ages, but she just wanted to live a peaceful life in the future. After this incident, this wish became an extravagant hope. She had to cover her face even when she went out, afraid of being recognized. How could there be a peaceful life? As for the culprit who caused all of this, he didn't know where he was currently enjoying himself. "If you don't like it, you might as well give me that book of poems." Wan Ruoqing looked at her and said with a smile, "I'm afraid you can't bear to part with it. Without that book of poems, our goddess of Luo Shui won't have something to hold and smile at every night." "And you're talking about me? I don't know who it is that has to take out that sky lamp to look at every 2 days. Zheng Zumo's pretty face blushed slightly, but she didn't lose out at all. An imperceptible trace of envy appeared in Wan Ruoqing's eyes. She changed the topic and said, "The top 10 courtesans of Upper Yuan Night have already been selected. Don't you want to know who the courtesans are this year?" "Who else can it be? It's just that the battle for the first place is a little more intense, but it's just a competition between Lu Qiaoqiao and Lu Yi. Lu Yi wants to surpass Lu Qiaoqiao, who has the support of Qing and Scholar with just a few businessmen. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for her to get the first place. As for the others, it's probably those old faces." Zheng Zumo added a few more strokes on the canvas and said indifferently. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "Indeed, Lu Yi lost to Lu Qiaoqiao by a small margin in the end and could only settle for second place. In addition to the two of them, there are 4 other courtesans who are still famous. The Jade Courtyard lost you and gained Shen Miao Miao. Although it's only the last place with your fame, the Jade Courtyard won't have any big loss this time." There was a sentence that Wan Ruoqing didn't say. Although Lu Qiaoqiao was this year's champion, in terms of popularity, she was far less than Zheng Zumo. If she didn't redeem herself, even if she didn't do anything, she could still firmly take the position of champion. There was a knock on the door behind her. Wan Ruoqing walked over and opened the door. When she saw the person, she couldn't help but be slightly stunned. "Zheng Zumo, why do you have to do this?" A voice containing too many emotions suddenly sounded. The Jade Courtyard's madam ran into the courtyard. Looking at Zheng Zumo, who was dressed in plain clothes and didn't even have a decent piece of jewelry on her. Tears fell down. "Mom, why are you here?" Zhang Zumo was shocked. She looked back and only breathed a sigh of relief when she found that no one had followed her. The madam grabbed her hand and said excitedly, "Zhang Zumo, come back with me. What's wrong with the Jade Courtyard? There's good food and drinks. Even if we have to serve you like an ancestor, it's fine. You're already living a life of happiness. Why do you have to suffer like this?" Looking at the madam's tearful and distressed expression, Zhang Zumo was a bit amused and said, "Mom, you don't need to persuade me. Since I'm out, I won't go back. Oh, right. Remember to pick tender ginger in the future. Old ginger is too stinging. You can't stand it." The method of using old ginger to make people cry was taught to her by her mother. She wanted to use this method to gain sympathy, but she used the wrong person. Hearing her words, the madam wiped away her tears and sighed. "Sigh, you heartless woman. I didn't provide you with good food or good drink. Now that you've grown up, the Jade's Courtyard can't accommodate the goddess of Luo, Shui, anymore. You really don't plan to go back?" After complaining for a while, the madam asked tentatively for the last time, "I'm not going back." Zhang Zumo smiled and said with absolute certainty. A trace of annoyance appeared on the madam's face. She turned and walked out, saying as she walked, "All right, the child has grown up. I can't keep her anymore. I just hope you don't forget the sisters in the courtyard. If there's a chance, support them more, and that will be your repayment to me." This time, she didn't expect to invite Zhang Zumo back. Although she was no longer in the Jade Courtyard, because of her great rise in fame, the Jade Courtyard's reputation also spread. These days, business was very good. If she hadn't been so heartless before and turned to support Chun Miao Miao, even if she couldn't invite her back, she would still be able to get more benefits. But now, she could only hope that Zhang Zumo would remember the past and help the girls in the building, which was also helping her in disguise. Finally out. Seeing the madam's figure disappear, Zhang Zumo's heart relaxed for no reason. Finally here, looking at the city walls that were much taller and more majestic than Qing in Prefecture City, he let out a long breath and relaxed. Chapter 305. Of course, he wasn't the only one who relaxed. When they reached the foot of the city, the 11 guards nimbly dismounted. After traveling back and forth for half a month, they finally returned to the capital. Lu Rui jumped down from the carriage and looked at the most prosperous city in the Jing Kingdom. Outside the city gates, there were people weaving in and out, and there was an endless stream of carriages and horses. It was far more prosperous than Qing and Prefecture. Was this the capital? Behind her, the guards looked at her with respect. During the journey, no one dared to look at her as a weak girl. The young master really had the foresight to bring a girl like this along. Just as they were facing dozens of bandits, as if they were facing a great enemy, they only saw the light of a sword flash and a white shadow weave through the crowd of bandits. In a moment, all the bandits could only lie on the ground and wail. Those with power were always respected by others. Even though she was a girl, these proud guards were willing to lower their heads. Elderly ordered, "Li Zheng, send 2 people back to the mansion first and tell the news of the young master's return." A moment later, 2 people handed their horses over to their companions and galloped into the city. Galloping on horseback was not allowed in the city, so galloping was much faster. "Young master, let's go," Elderly said with a smile. Li nodded and re-entered the carriage. The carriage slowly moved forward. Through the gap, he looked at the green stone slabs that were moving backward. His heart was very calm. As they neared the capital, the strange feeling in his heart gradually dissipated. It wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. This made Li feel that this trip was not in vain. On the way, Uncle Li had already told him everything about the current situation of the Li family. The old master of the Li family had made great contributions during the founding of the kingdom. He was promoted to a county magistrate and established the original foundation for the Li family. Decades ago, the Li family was considered prominent in the capital. However, with the passing of the old master, the descendants of the Li family did not make enough contributions to maintain their titles. The titles were reduced from generation to generation until the old master passed away. The Li family gradually declined until they were almost kicked out of the ranks of nobles. As the eldest son of the direct line of descent, Li's father was supposed to inherit the Li family's business. However, for a woman, he gave up everything and left for a faraway place. After the previous head of the family passed away, the heir to the title could only be the second son of the direct line of descent. Thus, the title became a county magistrate. Of course, other than the title, he also had an official position in the court. He was the pillar of the Li family. The carriage slowly entered the city. The greenstone paved street was at least twice the size of the main street of Qing and Manor. Even so, the street was slightly crowded. There was an endless stream of people and carriages. After the carriage traveled for about 15 minutes, the number of people on the road gradually decreased. The houses on both sides of the street became more and more imposing. Uncle Li shouted excitedly, "We're here!" The carriage stopped. Li Yi and Lu Rui disembarked. "Young master, the old madam is already waiting in the inner hall. Let's go quickly." The guard who had left earlier walked out of the crowd and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Uncle Li walked over and said, "Young master, come with me. We'll go see the old madam first." Li Yi was a junior, so he naturally couldn't let the elders welcome him at the door. Under the confused and curious gazes of the servants, he stepped into the Li family's front door. Although the Li family had declined, the house was still imposing. Li didn't know how many corridors and moon doors they passed through before they arrived in front of a spacious hall. Before they entered the hall, a trembling figure walked out of the house with the help of a walking stick. "My poor child!" The old madam, with a face full of wrinkles and white hair, shook off the support of the servant girls and walked unsteadily to Li Yi. She held his hand as tears streamed down her face. Li Yi didn't know what to do with this sudden scene. He could only let the old madam hold him. Seeing her crying tears of joy, Li Yi sighed softly and said with difficulty, "Grandmother, I'm back." The old madam didn't hide her emotions at all. It made Li Yi think of the old madam in another world. His heart couldn't help but be moved. "It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back." The old madam used her sleeve to wipe away the tears on her face. She looked up and down at Li Yi and murmured, "It can't be wrong. It can't be wrong. He's practically carved out of the same mold as Ming Han. He's a child of my Li family." As if remembering something sad, the old madam's mood became low again. "My poor child Ming Han." In Li's memory, he hadn't seen the father or the original owner of his body mention anything about the family. However, every year during the Double Yang festival, he would get drunk and say things like, "Mother, I'm unfilial. I've let you down," with tears streaming down his face. It could be seen how important the old madam was in his heart. Along the way, he learned from Uncle Li that the old madam loved her eldest son the most. In the past 20 years, she often cried late at night and became ill from worry. Her health had always been poor. Suddenly, the old madam seemed to notice something. She suddenly looked at Lu Rui, who was standing beside Li Yi. Her eyes lit up, and she let go of Li Yi. She hurriedly walked over and held her hand. "Is this my granddaughter-in-law? You're so pretty. My grandson has good taste. Come, let grandmother take a good look." Hearing the old madam say granddaughter-in-law, the guard named Li Zheng's expression changed drastically. A few days ago, he was dragged by the collar and thrown out of the courtyard by this heroine because he called her second madam. Even now, his butt was still aching. If the old madam was thrown out, she would lose her life. However, the scene that he was worried about did not happen. The old madam held Lu Rui's hand. The more she looked at her, the more satisfied she was. The wrinkles on her face smoothed out. She took off a bracelet from her wrist and said, "This is the first time I'm meeting my granddaughter-in-law. I don't have anything good to give you. Take this bracelet. From now on, you're a member of the Li family." Mississippi Lu, who was always fearless and could even poke a hole in the sky when she was angry, seemed to be at a loss. She looked at Li Yi with a pleading gaze. Li Yi could only walk over and explain, "Grandmother, the madam is not feeling well. She couldn't stand the fatigue of the long journey. so she didn't come with us. This is my wife's sister. Sisters are like a family. It's the same, it's the same. But the old madam didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. She put the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist with a smile. What do you mean by it's the same? Li stood there in a daze. He was speechless for a moment. Uncle Li, who was standing at the side, watched the old madam put the bracelet on the wrist of the madam's second daughter. His eyes widened, and his face was full of disbelief. This bracelet was put on by the old madam when she married the master. It had always been passed down to the first wife of the Li family. The second wife begged the old madam for decades, but the old madam didn't give it to her. Could it be that she was so happy at this moment that she forgot about it? Chapter 306. The Li family obviously had a tradition of valuing females over males. After seeing her precious granddaughter-in-law, old mistress completely forgot about the existence of Li Yi, her real grandson. She pulled Lu Rui's hand and walked into the house. Old mistress's enthusiasm far exceeded Li Yi's imagination. At this moment, he could only follow behind them. However, a few maidservants beside old mistress stole a glance at this young master whom they were meeting for the first time. After being discovered by Li Yi, they turned their heads away with blushing faces. There were quite a number of people in the hall. When old mistress pulled Lu Rui in, the crowd happened to come out to welcome them. Good, good. A middle-aged man in his 30s strode over to Li Yi. He patted his shoulder hard and said a few words with a face full of good. Li Yi felt some pain in his shoulder, but when he saw the man's slightly red eyes, he didn't argue with him. Young master, this is second master. You should call him second uncle, Uncle Li reminded him. There were 3 sons and 1 daughter in the direct line of descent in the Li family. The eldest son was not around, so the second son inherited the family business. This meant that the person in front of him was the master of the Li family, the uncle of the original owner of this body. Second uncle, Li Yi bowed and greeted. Perhaps it was because they shared the same bloodline, even though it was the first time they met. He couldn't help but feel a sense of familiarity with these people. This is third master, Uncle Li said as he pointed to another younger man. Li Yi bowed again. This third uncle only nodded slightly and didn't appear to be very enthusiastic. Li didn't mind this. Uncle Li had told him long ago that the third master of the Li family had a mild temper. He treated everyone like this and didn't have any ill intentions. There were second uncles and third uncles. Naturally, there were second aunts and third aunts. As long as one was born in a big family, which man did not have at least 1 or 2 concubines. Li Yi recognized a circle of people, but in the end, he only remembered the most important ones. Most of the womenfolk were circling around Rui. Li Yi saw a woman point at the bracelet that old mistress had just given her. She exclaimed with an exaggerated expression, "This bracelet looks so familiar. It looks like the one that old mistress is wearing." Then, everyone's eyes were glued to the bracelet on Lu Rui's wrist. Some were amazed, some were envious, and some were jealous. Li Yi immediately knew that old mistress might have given a big gift. These 2 children have been on the road for a few days. I'm sure they're exhausted. They've met everyone they need to meet. Let them go and have a good rest. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it at night. After a while, the old mistress issued an order. Out of all virtues, filial piety was the most important. The ancients had deeply implemented this traditional virtue. In this family, the men made the decisions for external matters. As for the domestic matters, old mistress was the one in charge. Rui, come with grandmother for a while. When Li Yi was escorted away by a few maidservants, he saw old mistress holding Mississippi Lou's hand and happily walking to the back hall. Although this was still a society that valued appearance, and it was easier to be liked by others if one was beautiful, Li felt that the way old mistress looked at him was not quite normal. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he was brought into a room by a few maidservants. A pretty maidservant said crisply, "Young master, this servant will help you bathe. It had been a tiring journey, and he was really tired. It would be nice to have a comfortable hot bath." Li took off his outer robe and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned around and saw that a few maidservants were standing behind him, looking at him with red faces. There was clearly some kind of light in their eyes. Li did not have the habit of being surrounded by people when he was bathing. He just wanted to have a good bath alone. After the bathtub and hot water were prepared, he sent them out. Lying comfortably in the bathtub, he began to miss Xiao Huan. At this time, if only he could have a little maidservant's hands massaging his shoulders. How good would it be? He had arrived at the capital, and the favor was almost repaid. When old mistress's birthday was over, he could say goodbye. Rui and Xiao Huan were still waiting for him at home. No matter how big the Li family's business was, it was not his turn to inherit it. Moreover, he was really not interested in it. Coming to visit the Li family was just the obsession of the child in his dream. Li had a premonition that when he dreamed again, he would not be able to see him. Just as Li was lying comfortably in the bathtub, a few maidservants sat in the corridor by the door and whispered, "That is the young master." It seems that the story of the young master running away from home 20 years ago is true. A maidservant with 2 buns exclaimed. A slightly older maidservant whispered, "Of course it is true. The elders in the manor all know that the young master ran away with a woman. Otherwise, how could the second master become master? I heard from old mistress that the young master looks exactly like the young master. I don't know if it is true." A round-faced maidservant murmured, "It is true, it is true. There is a portrait of the young master in old mistress's temple. I have seen it before. The person in the portrait is very similar to the young master. Old mistress always cries when she looks at the portrait. It should be the young master. The young master is really handsome. Although he looks thin when he takes off his clothes, he is really well built. Say, who do you think old mistress will send to serve the young master?" In these large families, the maidservants who serve the young master would usually become concubines. Although it was not to say that they would fly up the branches and become phoenixes, they would be able to live a life of luxury. Therefore, becoming the young master's maidservant was the dream of most maidservants. Hearing this, one of them sneered, "Stop dreaming. I think the young master doesn't have any feelings for us at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have driven us all out just now. Even young mistress's second daughter is so beautiful. I think young mistress is also a first-class beauty. Will the young master like us?" The maidservant who spoke just now was obviously disappointed. She changed the topic and said, "Old mistress likes the second daughter very much. She even gave the jade bracelet on her hand to her. I heard that the jade bracelet is only passed down to the first wife of the Leaf family. Second mistress has always wanted the jade bracelet, but old mistress never gave it to her. This time, second mistress will definitely be unhappy." When they had nothing to do, they would secretly gossip about their masters. It was probably one of the few entertainment for these servants. Especially when there was no one around, the topic would also be bolder. At this time, in a hall at the back of the house, an angry woman pointed at Li Mingze, the current head of the Li family, and said, Look, how biased she is. Can that bracelet be given away so casually? Does she want that outsider woman to be the first wife of the Li family? I knew it. After so many years, the old lady is still thinking about her eldest son. She keeps calling him good grandson. Does she still care about us? She can give away the family heirloom bracelets today, and she can give away the Li family tomorrow. Shut up. Li Mingze suddenly pounded the table, stood up, and said, He is the only blood of my eldest brother. He is a descendant of the Li family. I owe my eldest brother too much. I can't treat this child badly. Don't say these words again. After that, he directly flicked his sleeves and left, leaving only the woman in the hall, cursing even louder. As soon as Li woke up, he felt refreshed. It was rare that he didn't have any dreams recently. He raised his head and looked out of the window, finding that it was already dark. Young master, old mistress asked me to take you to dinner. After knocking on the door, a clear and crisp voice was heard. Chapter 307. The Li family was really big. More importantly, the roads were all twisted and turned, and there were moon doors one after another. He was not very good at recognizing the roads. After a simple wash of his face, he was still led by a young servant girl through the house. A big family was a big family. They even had a specific place to eat. They were not like those from small villages. Wherever there was a place to squat, that was the dining hall. Just as he walked through the door, a beautiful woman in her early 30s walked over. She pulled his hand and looked him up and down. "You really are Big Brother's child. You look exactly like Big Brother when he was young." The women of the Leaf family had the habit of holding people's hands when they met. When they were in the mood, they might even rub their faces a few times. Li Yi's face was almost deformed by the beautiful woman's pulling, but he still forced a smile and said, "You must be Auntie. Your nephew greets Auntie." The old madam had 3 sons and 1 daughter. Based on the way she addressed him, Li Yi quickly determined the identity of the beautiful woman in front of him. The old madam's youngest daughter was also his aunt in name. "Good child, come and sit. You must be tired from the journey." The women of the Li family were also very friendly. He had been in this world for more than half a year, but this was the first time Li Yi felt like he was being welcomed by everyone. It was like he had returned home after a long journey. Of course, being touched was one thing. He knew very well that his home was in Qing and Fu, not in the capital. He was pulled by the beautiful woman to sit next to the old madam. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who had changed into a new set of clothes. On her wrist was a jade bracelet given to her by the old mistress, and the hairpins on her head were replaced with a pair that she had never seen before. She just sat there quietly, and the butterfly wings on the hairpins fluttered slowly. One look, and one could tell that it was worth a lot of money. The sword that never left her side was nowhere to be found. After not seeing her for a while, she had changed from a peerless heroine to a lady of a noble family. Needless to say, this must be the credit of the old mistress. Only the old grandma's family was eating with them, and they controlled the core power of the Li family. Besides second uncle and third uncle's family that he had met in the morning, there was also this aunt who kept asking questions. At the end of the table, a child stared at Li Yi with wide eyes. He was very curious that this stranger he had never seen before could sit next to the old grandma. It was said that in a wealthy family, one should not talk while eating. This was the most basic rule, but Li Yi found that this rule did not apply to the Li family. The beautiful woman beside him kept asking him questions, and even the old grandma would occasionally add a few words. Of course, most of the questions were about his life these years, but most of them were about the father that he had never met. Fortunately, the strange dreams he had these days were probably the memories hidden in the depths of this body. It was easy for him to answer. He was only telling the truth, but the old grandma and the beautiful woman listened with tears in their eyes. "Your father has never told you about the Li family?" The old grandma rubbed her eyes and asked without batting an eyelid. Li Yi shook his head. This was the truth. Ever since he was young, no one had said a word to him about the Li family in the capital. The old grandma sighed and said sadly, "That year, in order to separate them, the old master almost caused your mother's death. He still hates us." Li Yi did not know that there was such a thing. No wonder in his memory, his father was always brooding over his mother's death. It seemed that the reason he did not want to talk about the Li family was mostly because of this. Not wanting the old grandma to be too sad, the beautiful woman quickly changed the topic and asked, "I heard from Butler Li that little is now a county lieutenant, and it was personally conferred by the emperor." With regards to this form of address, Li Yi could not react for a moment. Mississippi Lu, who was sitting opposite him, almost spat out the soup in her mouth. She patted her chest and looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. "Is the emperor's favor?" Li Yi could only nod his head and say, "Since you have received the emperor's favor, you should be more diligent. You have passed the imperial examinations at such a young age, which shows that you are very talented. Why did you not participate in the imperial examinations these past few years?" The middle-aged man sitting opposite the beautiful woman put down his chopsticks and looked at Li Yi. Without waiting for Li Yi to answer, he spoke again. "Any officials of the 7th rank and above will be promoted to the imperial scholar rank. Although you have received the emperor's favor, you should also study hard and strive to become an imperial scholar as soon as possible." The moment he opened his mouth, it was as if he was admonishing Li Yi. The emperor's favor was vast, and it was often vast. Perhaps just because of a poem or an article, if it caught the emperor's eye, one could be promoted to an official position. As the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Mingze had seen many of these things. Every year, if not 100, there would be at least 80. Although he was curious as to what Li Yi had done to earn the emperor's praise, he was not too surprised. No matter what, he was considered the most promising one among the younger generation of the Li family. Thinking about the situation of the younger generation of the Li family, he looked at the two people sitting below him and said, Inkai, the two of you should also learn from your elder brother. Inkai should listen to the teacher's teachings. Don't just think about playing around all day. As for Ingjia, you will be married in a few months. Don't go to the red light district anymore. Li Mingze no longer had any hope for his son. He planned to help him find an official position in the future so that he could live a stable life. Even if the Li family lost their nobility in a few decades, after so many years of business, they would not fall into a situation where they could be bullied. After Li Mingze finished speaking, a young man at the end of the table nodded his head. He felt as if he had been shot in the chest by an arrow. However, even if you gave him 10 guts, he would not dare to refute his father's words. As for the young man who was quickly shoveling food into his mouth with a wooden spoon, he only shook his round head. He was most afraid of this second uncle of his. Whatever second uncle said, he would do. Hurry up and finish eating. It was time to dig out the bird's nest in the tree in the yard. Fortunately, He was already immune to this kind of words. He even had to thank Professor Foam. He smiled and said that he would definitely study hard. In his heart, he thought that there were still 7 days until the old mistress's birthday. He wanted to have some time to experience the local customs of the capital. Then he packed his luggage and rushed home. He heard that if he took a boat from the capital, he would arrive at Qing in prefecture in less than 2 days, leaving the White Emperor in the morning among the colorful clouds. 1,000 miles of Jiangling returned in a day. This should be a scene like this, right? The meal was very harmonious. From the bits and pieces of conversation, Li Yi had a deeper understanding of the current Li family. In the capital, the political center of the Jing kingdom, a viscount was indeed not much. A random brick thrown on the street could kill 2 people. However, those families that were once prominent all had some history and would not decline so easily. This second uncle of his, other than being a viscount, was also an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. He could be considered a high-ranking official in the court. At his age, it was very likely that he would advance further in his lifetime. As long as he did not commit any political crimes, he could at least ensure the safety of the Li family for decades. In this kind of Li family, it did not matter much whether he was there or not. It was uncomfortable to be controlled by others in everything. It was better to return to the small Qing in prefecture and live life with Rui in that small courtyard. After sending away the servant girl arranged by the old mistress, he sat in the courtyard assigned to him. The moon on the 16th of the first month was quite round, but there were only a few stars. In the capital, that idiot Li Xian's wedding should have already ended. He did not know if he had returned or not. Her Royal Highness would probably not be able to dress up as a constable and parade around the city. Literally, as Li was thinking about this, a strange voice came from the top of the wall. Chapter 308. The Li family in the capital didn't have such a treasure as a rocking chair. Li Yi leaned on the small chair and looked at the white shadow standing on the wall. He said lazily, "Little thing, is that your childhood nickname? Why haven't I heard Rui mention it before?" Rui was stunned for a moment. Then she realized that this nickname seemed to be suitable for her. She wanted to make fun of Li Yi, but she didn't expect that she would get herself into trouble. There was a trace of annoyance on her pretty face. She threw away the servant girl who was anxiously shouting for her to come down and jumped down from the wall. "When are you going back?" She walked to Li Yi and said coldly with her sword in her arms. The impolite Mississippi Lu almost never called him brother-in-law. Li Yi was already used to it. Maybe since that day when she rode on the horse and looked at him as if he was a prey and said, "Take him away," she never planned to be a well-behaved sister-in-law. "We'll leave after my birthday. If we take the boat, it will only take 2 days." Lu Rui secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She didn't ask more and changed the topic. Madame is going to the temple outside the city to burn incense tomorrow. I'll go with her. Do you want to go? No. He shook his head and said decisively. Forget it. Mississippi Lou said coldly. She tiptoed and flew to the top of the wall. The servant girl opposite her screamed again. Lee looked at the courtyard next door. Mississippi Lou was just 17 years old. She was just a child. Although she always pretended to be cold and mature, the nature of a young girl couldn't be changed. Rui had always protected her and the little environmental protector very well. Although Rui was good at martial arts, her mind was rarely pure. Under her cold appearance, there was a lively, playful heart. Rui knew that she didn't want to get too involved with the Lee family, so she didn't come with him. Instead, she asked Rui to go with him. One reason was to protect her, and the other was to let her go out and relax. Thinking of her character, Lee couldn't help but worry about Rui's future. Although it was the beginning of spring after the Spring Festival, the weather started to warm up. People still had to wait until the Upper Yuan dynasty to feel the spring. The wind was gentle, the air was clear, and the sun was bright. The snow on the mountain had long melted. Today was a good day for traveling. Every year on the 17th day of the first lunar month, the cold mountain temple outside the city would hold a temple fair. Every time at this time, believers from all over the world would go up the mountain to worship. Scholars would offer some incense, praying that they would be able to graduate in the coming year. At that time, they would definitely give the Buddha a golden body. Young ladies hoped to find their Mr. Right as soon as possible. Newlyweds often went to pray to the goddess of mercy. In a feudal society, it was normal for the people to be a bit feudal. Without science, they had to believe in something. Today, the old lady was also going to the Cold Mountain Temple to fulfill her vow. She was accompanied by a large group of maids, a dozen guards, and a heroine with superb martial arts skills. As for Li, he was just going out for a walk out of boredom. The Cold Mountain Temple was naturally on Cold Mountain. It had nothing to do with the Cold Mountain Temple, which was the Cold Mountain Temple outside the city of Gusu, where the bell rings at midnight on the passenger ships. It was a short mountain, no more than 100 meters above sea level. Because of the Cold Mountain Temple, it became famous. Li sat in the carriage. After leaving the city, the journey began to be bumpy. He was not the only one in the carriage. The chubby brat was chewing on a juicy chicken leg, completely ignoring Li. To the brat, this chicken leg was much more interesting than this elder brother who had appeared out of nowhere. If Li remembered correctly, the brat in front of him was called Li Inkai. He was the son of third uncle Li Mingyuan. This time, he had been dragged out of the house by his mother. A chicken leg was in his hands, but after a while, only a few bones were left. There was not a trace of meat left on the bones. This showed that this brat was an expert at eating chicken legs. It wasn't until he sucked all 10 of his fingers and took out a few pieces of preserved fruit to stuff into his mouth that Li realized that there was a reason why this brat was so strong at such a young age. As if he felt a little embarrassed eating alone, the brat took out a piece of preserved fruit, looked at it longingly, and handed it to Li. Li had just seen him lick his hand like a bear's paw. Looking at the preserved fruit, he smiled and shook his head in refusal. The brat was clearly very happy. With a turn of his hand, he stuffed the preserved fruit into his own mouth. The Cold Mountain Temple was not far. After traveling for about an hour, they arrived at the foot of Cold Mountain. The stone steps paved with bluestone extended all the way from the foot of the mountain to the summit. There were already quite a few people climbing up the stone steps. The old man's body was inconvenient, so the carriage took a flat mountain path. The brat had just eaten something and had begun to fart nonstop in the carriage. Li had no choice but to jump off the carriage and tell the driver that he planned to go up the mountain on foot. When the time came, they could meet up at the top of the mountain. The air outside was much fresher, and there was even a faint fragrance in the air. Li noticed that there were many plum blossoms planted on both sides of the mountain path. In the last 2 days, the blossoms were in full bloom. Almost every young lady wearing a veil on their head had one, and the stone steps were covered in flower petals. Li Yi had not taken a few steps when he unexpectedly saw a blue-robed scholar plucking a plum blossom and inserting it into his hair. He had the bearing of a song scholar, a group of people who spoiled the scenery. A perfectly fine plum blossom had been broken into a mess, and they actually thought it was an elegant affair. Several people with flowers in their hair, who called themselves scholars, were reciting poems in front of a bare plum tree. The stone steps were not steep, but they were very long. It took Li Yi about a quarter of an hour to walk up the stone steps. When he arrived at the top of the mountain, he finally understood why he had met so many young masters and ladies along the way. The Cold Mountain Temple was not a lonely temple. In fact, the entire mountaintop was under the jurisdiction of the Cold Mountain Temple, including the surrounding plum blossom forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. The young ladies with the veil toured the plum blossom forest. Low chants and light laughter could be heard from the veil. The scholars spread a plain cloth under the plum tree, sat cross-legged, raised their cups, and drank to their heart's content. When they recited a good poem, it began to rain plum blossoms. When the peach and apricot trees were still bare branches, this endless plum blossom forest was indeed a good place to go for an outing. No wonder the Cold Mountain Temple chose to hold the temple fair today. This plum blossom forest would attract many scholars and beauties. After enjoying the plum blossom forest, they would go in to worship the Bodhisattva and Buddha. Naturally, they would also offer incense. These bald donkeys really knew how to pick the right time. Naturally, Li Yi was not in the mood to enjoy the plum blossom forest alone. Two coachmen were guarding outside the temple. They said that the old mistress had brought everyone into the temple to offer incense and to visit a famous monk. They were afraid that they would not come out for a while. Deeply educated by Marxism-Leninism, Li Yi did not believe in Buddha in the past. However, since something as unimaginable as time travel could happen, what else was impossible? He respectfully lit a stick of incense and threw a piece of silver into the mirror box. Then, he leisurely strolled around the temple. He did not like crowded places, so he chose quiet paths. The antique temple also had a unique charm. It was simple and dignified, which was something that the temples of later generations did not have. After passing through a few arched doors, the people gradually became sparse. When he walked out of the last moon door, a plum blossom forest that was even more flourishing than the outside appeared in front of him. "Why are you worried, almsgiver?" An old voice came from the plum blossom forest. "Life is full of unsatisfactory things. How can I not be worried?" The young man's voice continued. Li Yi stopped, and a look of interest appeared on his face. He took a few steps forward and saw the backs of an old monk and a young man in the depths of the plum blossom forest. Hearing the young man's words, the old monk casually pointed at a plum tree and smiled without saying a word. Li stood behind the two and watched the scene in a daze. Could this be the legendary Zen master and the young man? The young man was enlightened and murmured, "Master, do you mean that the plum blossoms have endured the bitter winter to have the fragrance they have today? The hardship is temporary, but as long as it is endured, it will bloom in spring." Li really did not want to spoil a perfect joke. He laughed until he held his stomach and said, "No, what master means is, what are you talking about in front of the plum blossom? Who?" The young man suddenly turned his head and pointed at Li Yi, who was standing behind him. Just as he was about to speak, his mouth opened halfway. The expression on his face was as if he had seen a ghost. Li laughed so hard that he could not straighten his back. He cupped his hands and said, "Sorry, I couldn't hold it in. Please continue. Continue." It was not good to spoil other people's discussion of Zen. Li planned to laugh again after he left. He did not look at the old monk and the young man's reaction. He guessed that they were still pondering the meaning of his words. He turned and walked in the direction he came from. Seeing Li Yi's reaction, a look of doubt appeared on the young man's face. Seeing that Li Yi was about to walk out, he hurriedly said, "Brother, please wait." Hearing the young man's words, Li Yi's footsteps sped up. He thought to himself that this guy did not want to continue discussing Zen with the old monk. Why did he come to me? Stop! Just as he was about to walk out of the moon door, two figures suddenly flashed in front of him and blocked his way. Seeing the two men standing in front of him, Li Yi was stunned. The expression on his face was also as if he had seen a ghost. Chapter 309. Looking at the two familiar faces in front of him, Li Yi was shocked. Why were Li Xian's guards here? These two were Li Xian's godlike followers. Generally speaking, wherever Li Xian appeared, there would be their shadows. Could it be that the slightly familiar voice he heard just now was, sure enough, when Li Yi thought of a certain possibility, an ecstatic face appeared in front of him. You've also come to the capital? There were 4 great joys in life. Rain after a long drought, meeting an old friend in a foreign land, wedding night, and getting a place in the imperial examinations. For Li Xian, wedding night was not a happy event. As the crown prince of Ningguang, his status was noble. There was no need for him to get a place in the imperial examinations. Only meeting an old friend in a foreign land could be considered an extreme joy. I'm originally from the capital. Do you know me, brother? Seeing the young man looking at him with a puzzled expression, Li Xian was a little stunned. After a closer look, he found that the other person's style of dressing was very different from before. In Li Yi's own words, he did not like to wear such showy clothes. His voice also seemed to be very different. Could it be that he had recognized the wrong person? Come to think of it, he had decisively rejected Mingzhu's invitation to come to the capital to become an official. 10 days ago, the two of them were still drinking and chatting merrily in the jadeite courtyard. Unless Li Yi set foot on the road to the capital as soon as he left Qing and prefecture, it would be impossible to see him here. But in this world, were there really 2 people who looked so similar? May I know this brother's name? I'm Li Yi. Li Yi cupped his hands in salute. An actor's self-cultivation, the basics of dramatic performance, an actor's learning manual. Li Yi, at this moment, felt like he was possessed by the best actor. If he worked hard, it was not impossible for him to win an Oscar. As for changing one's voice, the art of changing one's appearance and voice was an essential skill in the martial arts world. With just a little bit of skill, one could become a qualified voice actress. Li Xian no longer doubted his identity. After all, if it was really Li Yi, it was impossible for him not to recognize him. At this moment, he began to be interested in this person called Li Ming. Their appearances were more than 90% similar, and they were both surnamed Li. If it was said that the two of them didn't have any relationship, he wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death. Could it be that this person called Li Ming was Li Yi's twin brother? Li Xian, who thought he had discovered a great secret, immediately forgot all his worries and asked curiously, "Do you know someone called Li Yi? He looks almost exactly like you. Are you from Qing and prefecture and know my elder brother?" The young man looked at him with surprise. I know, of course I know." Li Xian laughed and said, "I really didn't think that Li Yi would actually have a younger brother that looks exactly like him. This is so fun." Li Yi sighed in his heart. With Li Xian's intelligence, to be able to live peacefully until he was 20 years old, he must have accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life. He didn't plan to reveal his identity now. Before he realized it, he could still have 2 days of leisure. At this moment, a guard walked over and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince's consort is coming." Li turned around and saw a group of people walking over. I'm afraid I won't have the chance today." "Li Ming, right? Well, I'm free. I'll find you for a drink." Li Xian laughed and strode forward. As long as he knew his name, investigating him was a very easy matter. The Crown Prince's consort. He saw a group of maids surrounding a woman with a curtain as she walked over. The woman's figure was not bad, but as for what she looked like, it was covered by a layer of white gauze, so he couldn't see it clearly. Li Xian hadn't been in the capital for long. It seemed that his marriage had only happened a few days ago. It was said that his Crown Prince's consort was the legitimate daughter of a wealthy family in the Jing Kingdom. Her status was incomparably noble, and she was also an outstanding beauty. However, the two of them didn't stick together all day long during their honeymoon period. Li Xian, this fellow, was discussing the problem of worry with the old monk. Could it be that the couple's life was not harmonious? If that was the case, finding the old monk would be useless. He should go find an old Chinese doctor, "Husband, have you seen Grandmaster Sandalwoodine?" Li Xian walked over with a smile on his face, and a light voice came from the veil. Li Xian nodded and said, "Great Master Tan Yin is well-versed in Buddhism and is worthy of being an enlightened monk. I have benefited a lot from talking with the Great Master. Husband's complexion is very good. I presume that the Great Master has already dispelled husband's doubts. Ling Long, before you leave, double the amount of incense in the temple." The woman's voice was soft. A maid beside her immediately nodded in agreement. "Since you've finished offering incense and paying respects to the Buddha, let's return early." After saying this, Li Xian walked forward with large strides. The lips of the woman in the curtain moved, but in the end, she didn't say the words of appreciating the plum blossoms together. She let out a long sigh and said, "Let's go." The luxurious carriage slowly descended along the mountain path. Dozens of guards surrounded the carriage. Inside the carriage, the woman who had already taken off the curtain sat upright on the brocade couch. She looked out the window at the young man who would rather ride a horse than ride in the same carriage as her. Her eyes were slightly lowered, and her fair hands tightly gripped the hem of her dress. I wonder what expression Imingzu would have if she knew that Li Yi has a brother who looks exactly like him. Li Xian rode on the horse with a strange smile on his face. "Your Highness." A guard rode a horse and whispered as he caught up to him. "What is it?" Li Xian turned to look at him. "Just now at Coal Mountain Temple." The guard hesitated for a moment and said, "I think I saw Miss Rui." "Miss Rui?" Li Xian raised his brows. "Which Miss Rui?" Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he pulled on the reins of the horse and asked, "Are you talking about Mississippi Lu?" "Maybe I saw wrongly. Maybe they just look alike," the guard said after thinking for a moment. It was a coincidence if it happened once, but it was inevitable if it happened twice. An excited expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He pointed at a few people and said, "The few of you, follow me up the mountain. The rest of you, escort the crown princess back to the residence." A few clouds of dust disappeared from the mountain path. Inside the carriage, the woman revealed a disappointed expression. She put down the curtain and said, "Let's go." Li Yi was looking at the old monk in front of him with a vigilant expression. In just the blink of an eye, the old monk had appeared in front of him. It was enough to show that the old monk was an expert. At the very least, he couldn't beat him. When I pointed at the plum tree just now, I meant to say that a moment of suffering is nothing and that there will be a day of happiness after suffering. Just like what the benefactor said, the old monk looked at Li Yi with a smile and asked, "Young benefactor, how could you have such a misunderstanding?" Li Yi understood that the old monk might be unhappy with his interruption just now. This was not a joke on the internet in the future, but a real Zen master. When facing a real Zen master, he naturally couldn't just casually make up a joke to deal with it. Li Yi's expression turned serious, and then he smiled mysteriously. He looked at the old monk and said, "The Buddha said, 'It can't be said, it can't be said.'" After saying that, he elegantly turned around and strode back in the direction from where he came. The old monk was stunned on the spot. After a long time, a smile appeared on his old face. He looked at the direction in which Li Yi left and said, "All appearances are fabricated. Worry is also empty, and worry is also empty. I was too obsessed with appearances. Young benefactor, you have great wisdom." Chapter 310. He pulled out a line in Buddhist language that he had heard from somewhere, and he didn't know if it was Buddhist language or not. In any case, that line, which he didn't understand but felt awesome, had frightened the old monk. Taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't recovered his wits, he hurriedly ran away. Who knew whether or not he would use the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion and great compassion to strike him when he woke up? Cold Mountain Temple was not small, with innumerable halls and pavilions. The old madam seemed to be listening to some famous monk preach the scriptures. For a moment, he didn't know where Rui and the others had gone, so Li Yi decided to just stroll around the temple. The temple fair would last for 3 days. In these 3 days, there was an endless stream of visitors to Coal Mountain. There were believers who came to pray to Buddha and burn incense, as well as young men and women who came solely to admire the plum blossoms. The sharp-witted peddlers had long since grasped this opportunity and had long since found a spot at the top of the mountain, selling little trinkets like combs, wooden tablets, and so on. They claimed that these items were treasures that had been consecrated by the high monks of Cold Mountain Temple. 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, 10 copper coins couldn't buy them, and 10 copper coins naturally couldn't buy a comb either. Treasures personally consecrated by the high monks were not for sale for less than 1 copper coin. In addition, there was naturally no lack of people selling food. On a plaza far away from the plum blossom forest, a space had been cleared out. Peddlers carrying poles stood next to each other, loudly shouting steamed buns and noodles. They were not allowed to go to the plum blossom forest, saying that it would spoil the mood of those nobles. Any young master or young lady, there was not someone they could afford to offend. A chubby boy dressed in embroidered clothes ran out of the plum blossom forest, huffing and puffing. He threw down a handful of silver, and in a short while, he ran into the forest with a large pile of food. Under a plum tree, a little girl of about 7 or 8 raised her head in anticipation. "Little candy eat." The chubby boy ran over, panting heavily, and placed all the things he had bought on the white cloth on the ground. "Thank you, big brother," the little girl said sweetly. She first picked up a piece of candied plum and gave it to the chubby boy. Then she sat down and began to eat. There were quite a few children of this age in the forest. They came out with their families, so it was impossible for them to quietly chant sutras and worship Buddha with the adults. In order to prevent them from making noise in the temple, most families would let their servants watch over them and let them play by themselves in the plum blossom forest. At this moment, there were a few servants standing behind the 2 children. Seeing the 2 young masters eating quietly, they began to chat. "Hey, Fatty Lee, you are here too." A few youths dressed in embroidered clothes quickly surrounded them, as if they had discovered a new continent. The little fatty's expression changed at first. Then he puffed out his chest and said, "Chin shout Hian, I don't want to fight with you today. Why are you eating every time I see you? I think you might as well not call yourself Li Inkai. Call yourself Pig Li instead." The few of them clearly had enmity with each other. The youth in embroidered clothes looked at the things on the white cloth and sneered. "Sure enough, it's Fat Pig Li. I'm afraid only pigs would eat these things." "Big brother." The little girl nervously grabbed onto the corner of the little fatty's clothes. "Pig Li, is this your sister? I thought everyone in your family was as fat as you." The youth in embroidered clothes laughed out loud. He suddenly ran over and fiercely stepped on the food on the white cloth. He pulled the little girl's face and pointed to the ground, saying, "This is the real pig's feed." How could a child bear such humiliation? The little fatty only felt his blood rushing to his head, and he punched the chest of a youth in embroidered clothes. "You dare to make a move, hit him." The youth in embroidered clothes seemed to be waiting for this moment. After avoiding the punch, he immediately shouted. Several youths behind him immediately swarmed up and pressed the little fatty to the ground. The little girl on the side was so scared that she cried out. The faces of several servants changed. Just as they were about to come over and pull them away, they were blocked by a few people who had been following behind the youth in embroidered clothes. There were many figures in the plum forest. Many people saw the scene here. Seeing that it was just a few children playing, they didn't take it to heart. "Hey, Fatty Lee, as long as you call me Grandpa, I'll let you go. How about it?" The youth in embroidered clothes squatted down and patted the little fatty's face. "Call you Grandpa." The little fatty had the advantage in size. He suddenly turned over and broke free from the few youths behind him. With a tiger pounce, he pressed the youth in embroidered clothes under his body. "Only when I'm full will I have the strength to beat you." With a loud shout, he clenched his fist and punched the youth in embroidered clothes. In the end, his fist didn't land on the face of the youth in embroidered robes. A young man grabbed his arm from behind and threw him to the side. He helped the pale-faced youth in embroidered robes up and said in a flattering manner, "Young master, are you all right?" Many people around frowned. A few children playing was nothing, but this young man attacking a child was a bit too much. "Catch him for me." Just now he was almost beaten by Li Inkai. The youth in embroidered clothes had a pale face. He was so angry that he stomped his feet and said to the young man, "Stop!" The few servants of the little fatty were firmly blocked and could not rush over. They could only shout anxiously, looking at the man walking towards him. The little fatty rubbed his bruised wrist and stood up with the help of a tree. He stared at the man with an unyielding expression. Who are they? How can they be so domineering in the cold mountain temple? Someone around asked doubtfully. Lower your voice. That is the young master of Duke Chen's family. The little fatty is called Li Inkai. He should be the younger generation of assistant minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. No wonder. These two families have been feuding for more than 10 years. However, it is a bit too shameless for a man to attack a child. That should be High Duke Chen's bodyguards. Little fatty only has a few servants who don't know martial arts. He's definitely going to suffer this time. However, it's just a joke between the younger generation. It won't be a big deal. Originally, there were a few people who disliked the man's behavior. After hearing that he was from Duke Chen's family, they immediately stopped talking. For most people, these words still carried a lot of weight. The little fatty gritted his teeth. When he saw the man's hand reach over, he was about to rush over. However, a hand reached out from behind him and grabbed the man's wrist. With a gentle shake, the man fell to the ground holding his arm and could not get up. At the same time, he felt someone pat him on the shoulder and a voice came from behind him. If you're being bullied, fight back yourself. The little fatty turned around and looked at the familiar figure. After a moment of shock, he shouted and rushed towards the youth in embroidered robes. The youth in embroidered robes wanted to run, but his reaction was a beat too slow. Soon, he was once again pounced on by the little fatty. The surrounding youths quickly rushed over to help, but they were unable to stop the little fatty's fist from landing on the youth in embroidered robes' face. The faces of the men blocking the little fatty's servants changed. Just as they were about to step forward, they saw the young man walking towards them. Let the children deal with their own matters. We should not interfere. Get out of my way, one of the men said impatiently. Just as he was about to walk past the young man, his body flew backwards in the next moment. So, there's no room for discussion? The young man looked at the men who were looking at him warily, and the smile on his face disappeared. Chapter 311. Just now, Li's view of this little fatty who was always thinking about eating changed. He knew that he was no match for him, but he was still unyielding. When fighting, he still remembered to protect the little girl behind him. It was hard to tell that this little fatty, who was a little hot-blooded, was actually the son of his third uncle, who was always indifferent no matter what happened. Even if the world was destroyed, it would have nothing to do with him. The grudges between children should be solved by them in their own way. It was fair no matter who won or lost. There was no need for these lackeys to intervene. You're courting death. Seeing that the young man kicked one of their people away, the remaining 4 guards were immediately furious. One of them went around to help the young man in embroidered clothes, while the other 3 surrounded Li. The 2 people that were dealt with just now, one was a trick and the other was a surprise attack. Among the remaining 3, one of them gave him a little pressure. Even if he could deal with them, he would not feel good. At the very least, he would have to take a few punches and kicks. Li was not prepared to be beaten. He looked at the young man who was watching the show with his arms crossed and asked, "How long are you going to watch?" Bang! The man walking towards the little fatty was sent flying by Li Xian's bodyguard with a kick. Li Xian walked over with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at him and said, "I couldn't tell that brother Li Ming actually had such skills." Li looked puzzled. "You've seen my brother?" Li Xian's footsteps paused, and the expression on his face began to become suspicious. "Who are you people? How dare you interfere in my business?" Seeing that one of their own people was sent flying, and this guy who came out of nowhere treated them as nothing, one of the 3 people, who was obviously a bit tough and irritable, said angrily, "Even though the capital was full of nobles, the Chun public house could be considered as a giant. Except for the imperial family and a few families that couldn't be provoked, it was basically an existence that could do whatever it wanted. Don't look at this big man's rough appearance. He was able to stay close to the young master and protect him. He had never heard that the Li family had any powerful backing, not to mention that the people in front of him were very unfamiliar. They were not the families that they couldn't afford to offend, so what was there to worry about? Your father. Li looked at the man in surprise and gave him a thumbs up at his heart. Daring to call himself lousy in front of Prince Ning's crown prince. Was this guy trying to rebel and become Prince Ning himself? The royal family cared a lot about their dignity. Being disrespectful to the emperor was a serious crime that could result in beheading. This person dared to call the emperor brother, so he was a good man with courage. Jing Ke could be considered as a courageous man, but in the end, he was chopped into pieces by Emperor Qin Shi Huang. There were so many courageous men on Mount Liang, but in the end, all of them were wiped out. Since the ancient times, all the courageous men were now dead. From this, it could be seen that hot-blooded men usually did not have a good ending. Not long after the man said the word lousy, he was slapped in the face by one of Li Xian's guards, causing him to spit out all his teeth. By the time the other two reacted, their shoulders had already been pressed down, and they couldn't move at all. Break their legs. The leader of Li Xian's guards made the decision on his own. Don't you dare. We are from the house of High Duke Chun. Both of their legs were about to be broken. If they didn't raise the flag now, it would be too late. Usually, when they bullied others, most of them would just give them a beating. Even when they were dealing with those insignificant lords, they wouldn't break their legs. This was an act that completely shed all pretense of cordiality. When the leader of the guards heard this, he turned and looked at Li Xian. In the next moment, he turned back and said to the guards, since they are from the house of High Duke Chun, just break one of their legs. In order not to disturb the atmosphere of people admiring the flowers, and to be a civilized person, the guards decided to drag them out of the peach forest and break their legs. At this time, the outcome of the fight with the little fatty had also been decided. It had to be said that when it came to fighting, the fatty had a natural advantage. The four youths had lived a luxurious life since they were young. They probably hadn't put in much effort to practice martial arts. They only used simple punches and kicks. If the strength was light, hitting the little fatty's body was like scratching an itch. However, if they were hit by the little fatty's fist, they could only squat on the ground and cry. There was no other outcome. In a short while, the four youths were all knocked to the ground. The little fatty crawled up from the ground and panted heavily. He patted the dust off his body, completely ignoring his bruised and swollen face. He looked down at the four defeated youths and said loudly, "Didn't you want to fight? Get up." If he pointed to the sky and shouted, "Who else?" He was afraid that he would be struck by lightning if he acted so pretentiously. Hearing this, the few youngsters in embroidered clothes crawled up from the ground and quickly ran out of sight. This is... Li Xian pointed at the little fatty who looked like the leader of the martial arts world. Li shook his head and said, "We'll talk about this later." "Young master." Only then did the servants have time to run over. When they saw the little fatty's sorry state, they were about to cry. "I'm fine." The little fatty wiped his snot. Although his body was in great pain, his heart was sweeter than eating candied fruit. He ran to the little girl's side and held her hand, saying, "The delicious food is all dirty. Big brother will buy it for you later." A servant walked to Li worriedly and said, "Young master, those are the sons of High Duke Chen's family. Young master beat them up. We're in big trouble." High Duke Chen. Li looked at him and asked, "If it wasn't for today's incident, would they have caused less trouble for the Li family?" The servant was speechless for a moment. Young master's words seemed to make sense. The Chun and Li family had been at odds for more than 10 years. The Chen family had been intentionally or unintentionally suppressing the Li family for so many years. It could be said that the Chun family had a lot to do with the Li family's rapid decline. High Duke. There were only a few High Dukes in a country. The small Li family obviously couldn't afford to offend a first-class duke, but someone could. Li turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Can we afford to offend High Duke Chen?" Li Xian didn't seem to hear Li Yi's words. He looked at the little fatty, then looked at Li Yi and murmured, "Young master, young master, when did you have a son like this?" It seemed like he could afford to offend them, Li felt that this world was quite unfair. They both had the surname Li, but why was there such a big difference? When the Li family was at its peak, there was still a big gap between them and the Chun family. The two families could have been on good terms, but in the end, the daughter of the High Duke was abandoned. It was no different from a slap in the face to the Chun family. Since then, the two families became enemies, and they went down the road of love and hate. Even if Li Xian didn't appear today, he would still stand up for the little fatty. First, as a member of the Li family, he couldn't watch him get bullied by others. Second, the reason why the Chun and Li families were in such a situation today was entirely because of his stubborn father. Li felt very wronged. He didn't do many bad things in his previous life. He just didn't dare to help an old lady who fell, picked up some money on the street, and casually spent it. He didn't offend anyone. He transmigrated peacefully, but he somehow got involved in the fight of the pugilistic world and family disputes. Whatever he did, there would be people who opposed him. Even if he didn't do anything, there would be people who wanted to step on him. Wasn't it good to live a good life? If he had transmigrated into Dazhuang and Dazhuang's body, there wouldn't have been so many messy things, right? It was only the second day he came to the capital, and he already offended a High Duke. Fortunately, he had that brother's godly assistance. With one sentence, he also dragged the royal family into the matter. Even if the servant's leg was broken, the Chun family probably wouldn't have the guts to find trouble with Li Xian. It was very likely that they would specially visit him to apologize. As for the Li family, it didn't matter if there were too many lice. After so many years of grudges, it didn't matter if there was another one. On the contrary, because of today's matter, if they wanted to find trouble with the Li family in the future, they might have to think twice. Li felt that he was about to become a schemer. This damned society. In just half a year, a good young man of the 21st century had been forced into such a state. Feudalism was killing people. Just as Li was sighing because of this, a group of people walked over from the entrance of the plum blossom forest in a grandiose manner. The ones walking in front were obviously the few youths with snot and tears running down their faces covered in bruises. Chapter 3:12. Behind the young men in embroidered clothes, the guards who were acting violently just now were now being carried by others. They were wailing incessantly, and one of their legs was bent at a strange angle. Li Xian's guards walked over from behind and stood quietly behind him. Their faces regained their calm expression, as if they were not the ones who broke someone's leg just now. At this time, the difference between professional guards and non-professionals was reflected. Li once again realized the importance of bringing a few reliable bodyguards when he went out. People like Mississippi Liu, who were always missing at critical moments, would definitely starve to death in this line of work. Brother Liqing, it's them. The leading young man in embroidered clothes pointed at Li and the others and said loudly to the young man beside him. After saying that, he gritted his teeth and looked at the little fatty opposite him, who had his head held high and chest out, as if his eyes were about to spit fire. It's just child's play. Don't you think you've gone too far by doing this? The young man walked forward and looked at Li with a frown. As he spoke, he was also sizing up the people opposite him. In the capital city, he knew all the young men of similar age with a background. He even met a few of the emperor's princes a few times. These two people obviously did not belong to any of them. However, they dared to ignore High Duke Chen's residence. The dignity of a High Duke was only worth a leg in their eyes. If they did not really have a powerful background, then they were lunatics. However, before figuring out the identity of the other party, he would not go too far. He first tried to sound them out. Seeing that the other party was frowning and looking at him as if he wanted to seek justice for those people, Li sighed in his heart. This was how the world was. The right was always in the hands of the few, the rich and the powerful. When he tried to reason with them, they insisted on using force. When they lost to Li Xian's guards in terms of force, they turned around and tried to reason with him. This was not the way to bully people, right? All the young masters and young mistresses present can testify that our young master clearly said just now that the children's affairs will be dealt with by themselves and did not intervene in the quarrel between the young masters. However, your family's guards actually bullied the young. I'm afraid that this is damaging to the dignity of High Duke Chun, isn't it? The servants of the Li family also felt that the young man was distorting the truth. Those people's legs were broken, but what did it have to do with their young master? It was obvious that they were blind and offended that young master, which caused the disaster. The Li family was not going to take the blame. Not bad. Indeed, the surrounding young masters and young ladies nodded in agreement. Although it was unreasonable for the young master to allow the little fatty to fight with a few children, he still knew his limits. On the other hand, Duke Chin's guard actually disregarded his status and attacked a child. It was a little too shameless. Moreover, in the beginning, it was the few kids from High Duke Chin's family who provoked them first. The little fatty was not weak at all. After what happened just now, he had already won a good impression in everyone's hearts. As for the bodyguards who had their legs broken, they had only themselves to blame. How could someone who could bring so many powerful bodyguards with him be an ordinary person? The house of High Duke Chen might be a colossus in the eyes of ordinary people, but what kind of place was the capital? There might not be many people who did not respect the house of High Duke Chen, but a few bodyguards who relied on their master's power would not be taken seriously. Feeling the gazes from the surrounding people, the young man felt a little embarrassed. He said, "Even if they are in the wrong, isn't it too cruel to break people's legs so easily?" He realized that this guy seemed to have set his sights on him. From the beginning to the end, he only broke one person's arm and sent another flying with a kick. The person who broke their legs was standing behind Li Xian. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. If he had the ability, he could go and find them. What was the logic of always coming after him? Moreover, what was so cruel about breaking a person's leg? That guy wanted to be Li Xian's father and be brothers with the emperor. It was already benevolent of his highness that he was not beaten to death. Even if he went up and slapped Li Xian twice or kicked him twice, his crime would be much lighter than calling himself father in front of him. In the end, there were still people who were reasonable. A guard with a broken leg couldn't help but point at Li Xian's group and said, "Young Master Chung, our injuries were done by those people." Chen Liqing had the thought of personally breaking his other leg. Damn it, can't you just say it all at once? After talking for so long, you haven't even found the culprit. Are you kidding me? At this moment, he was also secretly cursing his bad luck. Why couldn't they just stay at home? Why did they have to bring a few friends to the Cold Mountain Temple to enjoy the plum blossoms? What was even worse was that they had brought the little devil of their family. He was just an ordinary collateral family member of the Chun family. He had neither money nor status. The little devil in front of him with purple eye sockets was the treasure of the Chun family. If he didn't handle it well today, he wouldn't be able to explain himself when he went back. Why don't we go to the temple and find a place to sit? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi and suggested. Li Yi agreed with his idea very much. It didn't feel good to stand here and be stared at like a monkey. The naughty kid's face was bruised, and he had to find a place to apply some medicine. Stop. Seeing that the two people seemed to be really planning to leave, Chen Liqing stepped forward and said loudly, "Don't you think you owe us an explanation? What do you want? Just say it." Li Xian pointed at a few guards. They understood and stepped forward to stand in front of the crowd. Li Xian looked at them and said impatiently, "Do you want to come one by one or all at once?" Arrogant, too arrogant. This was the most intuitive feeling of Chen Liqing and the man behind him. That person looks gentle, like someone who has been educated. How can he be so rude? Let's sit down and talk. If the other party also has a strong background, we just need to apologize and symbolically break a few legs. Both of us will have face, and the matter will be solved perfectly. Do we have to fight? All the guards who have martial arts on their side have their legs broken. How can a few scholars fight with those people? Aren't they courting death? Compared to Chen Liqing and the others, the surrounding people felt differently. Especially the eyes of the young women under the veil, they were all quietly glowing. The surrounding crowd naturally had to stand on the side of truth. High Duke Qin's servants used their power to bully others. Chun Liqing was just continuing to be vicious. As for the two young masters, they were obviously in the right. Of course, the most important thing was that the two of them were really handsome. Humph, we are scholars. How can we be like those boorish people in the mountains? Chun Liqing snorted coldly. A disdainful expression appeared on his face, covering the fear just now. He said, "Why don't we have a civil battle? If you win, we will let bygones be bygones. If we win, you need to personally apologize, and the person who attacked just now will have to break one of his legs. How about that?" Chun Liqing wasn't stupid enough to use his shortcomings to compete with other strengths. They were all scholars, so they should use a more refined method. It was better to recite poems and write essays. As for fighting, it was simply a disgrace to scholars. After they left, they would investigate their background. If the two of them didn't have any background, they would definitely regret being born into this world. Civil battle? Hearing this, Li Xian thought for a while and decisively shook his head. Too troublesome. Let's have a martial battle. Why don't we only send out 2 people and all of you come together? Chapter 3:13. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he cannot be reasoned with. That was how Chun Liqing felt. The person in front of them was clearly a scholar, but he did not follow the rules of a scholar. He was determined to fight with force instead of words. The other party's bodyguard was obviously an expert that had been carefully selected. Even if there were only 2 of them, the few of them were definitely not a match for them. Only an idiot would agree to a physical fight. Li Xian frowned and looked like he was in a hurry. He said impatiently, "Fine, if you want a literary fight, then so be it. What are the rules?" Seeing that the person in front of him was finally being reasonable, Chun Liqing was overjoyed. He said, "It's simple. It's the season for plum blossoms, and we're in the middle of a plum forest. Why don't we use plum blossoms as the theme and compose a poem? Let everyone here judge who is better. This is a literary fight." With that, he whispered to the person beside him, "Hurry and invite young Master Shun over. It's your turn." Li Xian crossed his arms and glanced at Li Yi. Once again, he looked like he was watching a good show. The ball went around in a circle and returned to Li Yi. There's no need for a literary fight. Li Yi was more inclined to Li Xian's suggestion. What couldn't be solved with 1 fist? If not, then 2 fists. Clean and efficient, without the slightest hesitation. If Mississippi Lou was here, she would have done this long ago. After spending so much time with her, it was inevitable that she would influence the way she did things. Haha, if you're afraid, you can just admit defeat. Chun Liqing smiled and said, "You only need to apologize in person and break the hands and feet of those who attacked you. Then we can forget about this. What do you think?" After seeing the other party's hesitation, Chun Liqing was even more certain that they were just 2 idiots. The last bit of worry in his heart disappeared. See, if they don't want to, then there's nothing to talk about. Li Xian said with a hint of schadenfreude. The scholars of Qing and prefecture had already been harmed by him. The mere mention of the name Li Yi would make one's heart tremble. He was very happy to see the same thing happen in the capital. Only then would it be fair. Whispers of discussion could be heard from the surroundings. This Chun Liqing is also a genius with a little bit of fame, but he doesn't know right from wrong and acts shamelessly. Today has really opened my eyes. The people around him are all famous talents in the capital. In terms of poetry, how could those 2 young masters possibly compete with him? Look, he even invited young Master Shun here. Could it be that, although young Master Shun hasn't been in the capital for long, he made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival, using his poetry to win over most of the scholars? I heard that he intends to curry favor with the Chun family. Looks like Chun Liqing really doesn't care about his reputation anymore in order to win. Even though the surrounding scholars and young ladies were mostly standing on the side of Li Yi and Li Xian, they didn't think that they would be able to win. How could 2 nameless people compare to those outstanding scholars? What's more, there was a top talent like young Master Shun holding the fort. Does it hurt? Li Yi wiped the dust off the fatty's face and asked. No. Even though he grimaced in pain from being touched, He only breathed in and out, but he didn't admit it at all. He patted his chest and said, "This kid has a backbone." When the fatty showed off his prowess, Li Xian was also there. He walked over and patted his shoulder. Hearing the compliments, the fatty puffed out his chest even more. He held the young lady's hand like a victorious rooster. "Brother Shun, you're here." When a young man walked over, Chun Liqing smiled and went to greet him. The young man called Brother Shun cupped his hands and said, "I wonder why Brother Chun called me over. I do have something to trouble Brother Shun with." Chun Liqing smiled and said, "Let's go over and talk." "Haha, we're all friends. There's no need to be so formal." The young man looked at Chun Liqing in surprise and said with a smile, but he kept an eye on Chun Liqing. He knew that even though he called these people brothers on the surface, they were all from wealthy families in the capital. He was just an outsider. With the difference in status, they wouldn't treat him as a friend. Moreover, the scholars of the capital in Qing and had always looked down on each other. If it weren't for the fact that he had no background in the capital and needed their help, and the fact that they needed his poetry, they wouldn't be so friendly on the surface. As he brought him over, Chun Liqing briefly explained what had happened. He smiled. "We are scholars, so we're not like those boorish mountain people who rely on strength to win. It's a disgrace to our culture, but if it's a battle of words, we'll need Brother Shun's help. After all, in terms of poetry, Brother Shun is still better. This way, we'll be absolutely safe." "Brother Chun, you're being too modest. The Lantern Festival is just my luck. All of you here are famous scholars in the capital. How could I dare to show off in front of you all?" The young man cupped his hands and said. The two complimented each other, and the crowd automatically opened up a path for them. Chun Liqing walked to the front and looked at Li Yi. "For the sake of fairness, each side will send one scholar to fight, and one poem will decide the winner." He still wanted to save face in front of others. He couldn't let a group of famous scholars bully two nameless juniors. As long as Shun Zhao made a move, it would be enough to sweep them away. Even though Shun Zhao came from Qing, and it was said that when he was there, he was quite famous. In terms of poetry, there weren't many in the capital who could guarantee that they could beat him. With him here, they wouldn't lose today. Li Yi helped the naughty child dust off his body and turn around. Shun Zhao's heart sank when he saw that silhouette when he walked over from the other side. When that person turned around and saw his face, Shun Zhao's heart finally sank to the bottom of the valley. As the second scholar of Qing, countless people followed him wherever he went. Countless young mistresses pursued him, and he could even make the prostitutes pay him money if he wanted to. Of course, this was all in the past. He didn't want to be the leader of the scholars of Qing and prefecture. Why did he come to the capital? It was because he didn't have the face to stay in Qing and prefecture. One poem, Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, and one poem, Chao, made him lose all of his pride there. It wasn't until he came to the capital and made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival that he regained some confidence. In terms of poetry, he wasn't afraid of Yang Yanzhou. He wasn't afraid of all the scholars of Qing and prefecture. He wasn't even afraid of the famous scholars of the capital, except for one person. That person was standing right in front of him. "Brother Shun, I'll have to trouble you with this poem." Chun Liqing walked over and patted his shoulder with a smile. After seeing Shun Zhao's poems, he had unparalleled confidence in Shun Zhao. He was also the one who was least likely to lose. If he could help him regain his face today, even if it was just a little bit of effort, it wouldn't matter if he managed to get on the Chun family's good side. Shun Zhao came back to his senses and finally realized what Chun Liqing wanted him to do. "Brother Chun." Shun Zhao turned around and looked at Chun Liqing with an incomparably serious expression as he slowly spoke. "I think you guys should fight." Chapter 314. Good. Seeing Shun Zhao open his mouth, Chun Liqing was just about to praise, "Good poem." As soon as the word "good" left his mouth, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stared at Shun Zhao and asked uncertainly, "Well, what did you just say?" Shun Zhao sighed and looked at Chun Liqing. "Brother Chun, believe me, if you choose to fight, your chances of winning will be higher. Brother Shun, now is not the time to joke." Chen Liqing raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Shen Zhao's behavior was very abnormal. Although Chen Liqing did not think much of him because of his family background, he had to admit that he was very talented in poetry. It was not difficult for him to write a poem out of his mouth. Under normal circumstances, Shen Zhao, who wanted to curry favor with the Chen family, would not offend him over such a small matter. In reality, he had not shown any intention of refusing until just now. Chen Liqing's gaze immediately turned to the young man opposite him. "What's going on? What's wrong with Shen Zhao?" Confusion appeared on the faces of the people behind Chen Liqing. For a moment, they could not understand what he had just said. As for the people around them, their minds were even more muddled. "Brotherly, long time no see." Shen Zhao raised his head and raised his hands in a salute to Li Yi. For some reason, after seeing this person who had changed the course of his fate again, his heart was calm and there was not a trace of hatred. In these days in the capital, he often thought back to the past. After losing the pride of the past, he suddenly found that the frivolity and arrogance of his youth, in the eyes of today, was just a joke. That young man had woken him up with a resounding slap, letting him know that there was always a higher mountain. He had completely shattered his pitiful arrogance, but it had also made him settle some things that he had never had before. "Brother Shun, long time no see." To be able to see an old friend from Qing in prefecture here, Li Yi was slightly surprised and also raised his hands in a salute. Although the two of them had once clashed, there was no unforgettable hatred. To be able to see each other in the distant capital was not easy. Of course, the most important reason why Li Yi did not hate him was because he had taken advantage of him at that time. At this time, he faintly felt that the Shen Zhao in front of him was not the same as before. So they know each other. Everyone came to a sudden realization. No wonder Shen Zhao was unwilling to stand up for Chen Liqing. If that young master was an old acquaintance of his, then everything would make sense. Chen Liqing's face was a little embarrassed. He couldn't help but feel some resentment towards Shen Zhao. He sneered and said, "Shen Zhao, do you think that without you, we can't compose a poem?" This time, she didn't even call him Brother Shun. Shen Zhao smiled and said, "I know that my talent in poetry is far from Brother Li's, so I won't embarrass myself. Brother Chen and the other brothers are all famous scholars in the capital, brimming with talent. Naturally, you don't need me." He naturally understood the meaning behind Chen Liqing's words. He was afraid that after today, they would no longer tolerate him. However, this was no longer important. These days, he had been trying to cling on to others, and there seemed to be something stuck in his heart. When he said those words just now, he suddenly felt a long-lost, carefree feeling. No matter how conceited Chen Liqing was, he wasn't conceited enough to think that his poetry was better than Shen Zhao's. He only thought that Shen Zhao's words were modest. However, even if he couldn't beat Shen Zhao, couldn't he be compared to a nameless kid? Have you all thought it through? If you really can't compose a poem, then admit defeat. Chen Liqing sneered and no longer cared about Shen Zhao. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Why are you composing a poem? Go home a dream." Being forced to copy poems was something he had experienced many times. Li Yi had already lost interest in it. He waved his hand and said, "How old are you? What's the point of fighting all day? Can you not be so childish? Let's go." He patted the little fatty's head and turned to walk towards the exit. The little fatty hurriedly grabbed the little girl's hand and ran after him. "Big brother, wait for me. The one selling buns in front. Wait a moment, too." Chen Liqing stared blankly at their backs as they left. His face turned green and then white. There was a mouthful of hot blood in his chest. They left just like that. What was going on? Even if they wanted to leave, they had to apologize and break the legs of those servants before they could leave. "All of you, stop right there." Chen Liqing shouted loudly. Just as he was about to chase after them, the young man who left turned around and revealed 2 rows of white teeth. He smiled and said, "If you follow me again, I'll break your legs too." After saying that, Li Xian laughed loudly. He was in a good mood and quickened his pace to chase after them. The group of people who were left looked at each other in dismay. The surrounding people who wanted to watch the show were clearly disappointed. They thought that there would be an exciting battle of words and two excellent poems. They didn't expect that one side would retreat without a fight. But thinking about it, they knew that they were no match for Chun Liqing and the other scholars. If they really went to compose a poem, they would be asking for humiliation. They might as well retreat shamelessly. Preposterous. Chun Liqing's face no longer had the slightest trace of elegance. His eyes were about to spit fire. Investigate. When we go down, we must investigate the background of those two fellows. He had suffered such humiliation. If he didn't avenge himself, he was afraid that his heart would never be at peace. Brother Liqing, why are you so angry? Left and right are just two cowardly rats. They don't even have the courage to fight a battle of words. I'm afraid that they don't have a bit of knowledge and can't even compose a decent poem. Left and right are two idiots. After today, there will be no place for them in the circle of scholars in the capital. Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Lu's words make sense. A person beside Chun Liqing comforted him, and the rest of the people revealed looks of disdain on their faces at the right time as they echoed one after another. As for the surrounding people, even though they felt that it was unfair for Chun Liqing to propose a battle of words, the two young masters didn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Even though they were smart, they didn't have the backbone of a scholar. They don't have a bit of knowledge, idiots. At this moment, an undisguised laughter rang out from the crowd. The laughter was piercing to the ears. Everyone turned their heads to look. It's Shun Zhao. After discovering the source of the laughter, everyone was stunned. What are you laughing at? Chun Liqing glared fiercely at him and asked. Shun Zhao held his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. He pointed at Chun Liqing and said, Brother Chun, on your waist, can I take a look at the fan on your waist? Seeing Shun Zhao's expression, Chun Liqing was shocked. Why would he want a fan at this time? Was this Shun Zhao crazy? It was said that once this person became crazy, he could do anything. If one didn't do as he said, who knew what he would do? A trace of fear appeared on Chun Liqing's face. He quickly handed over the fan on his waist. Whoosh! Shun Zhao waved his hand and opened the fan. He smiled and said, You wrote this Shui Diao ghetto on the fan. I believe that Brother Chun likes it a lot. Chun Liqing took a step back. He thought to himself that he liked this Shui Diao ghetto. What did it have to do with Shun Zhao? Shun Zhao stopped laughing. He looked strangely at the scholar who had just called him an idiot. He said, When Brother Lu writes a poem that surpasses this Shui Diao ghetto, then you can go say that others are an idiot. He returned the fan to Chun Liqing and laughed. Brother Chun, you don't need to investigate him anymore. That idiot brother is Qingan Prefecture Li Yi. Seeing the expressions of Chun Liqing and the other scholars change, Shun Zhao felt extremely carefree. He laughed a few times and turned to leave without looking back. Qingan Prefecture Li Yi. Even though they didn't know what he looked like, this name was not unfamiliar to the scholars and beauties of the capital. Her pretty face was full of shock. Her cherry lips parted slightly, and she took out the round fan from her bosom. There was the immortal magpie bridge that she had personally embroidered. In this world, the best way to become famous was to write an excellent poem. No matter where the poem first appeared, it would eventually be known by all the scholars of the Jing Kingdom and be passed down for generations to come. How can this be? How can this be? Chun Liqing's mind was blank as he mumbled to himself. The scholar surnamed Lu's face was red. He wanted to find a hole in the ground to hide in. The surrounding crowd was shocked. A few poems involuntarily appeared in their minds. Under the curtain, the rich young mistress's pretty face was slightly red. Her gaze occasionally looked in the direction of the exit of the plum blossom forest. At this moment, no one would think that the person who left was retreating without a fight. That was disdain. He was right. Chun Liqing was stupid and childish to compete with the scholars who wrote Shui Dao Ghetto and Immortal Magpie Bridge. Shun Zhao was not being modest just now. From the beginning to the end, he had treated this matter as a joke. So what if it was Chun Liqing? So what if it was the gifted scholar of the Jing Kingdom? Could they make all the women in the world whisper in their boudoirs? If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night and embroider their poems on handkerchiefs? They couldn't. Thinking of this, everyone looked at Chun Liqing with a strange expression. Chapter 315. In a room in the back of the Cold Mountain Temple. Ouch! Be gentler, it hurts, it hurts. A servant of the Li family smeared the medicinal wine that the monks had brought onto the bruises on the chubby boy's face. The chubby boy, who had been hot-blooded and would rather be beaten than lower his head, continuously sucked in a breath of cold air and cried out in pain. It wasn't until a little girl stuffed a bun into his mouth that the room finally quieted down. Why have you come to the capital? Do you really have a younger brother here? Li Xian looked at Li Yi with a mind full of confusion, waiting for his explanation. Not only did he have a younger brother, but he also had 7 aunts and 8 aunts, even Wang Erniu from next door. To explain this matter to Li Xian, he first had to talk about the grudges of the previous generation. None of this is important. What's important is that I'm already in the capital, Li Yi said with a wave of his hand. He really didn't want to talk about those messy things again. He took a sip of tea and glanced at Li Xian. But didn't you come to the capital to finish your marriage? Why haven't you gone back yet? You're actually in the mood to discuss Zen with an old monk. This isn't like you. Could it be that after you got married, you've lost yourself in pleasure and even your personality has changed? If Li Yi remembered correctly, other than some special circumstances, a prince was not allowed to stay in the capital for long periods of time without the permission of the emperor. When he left Qing and Fu, Ning Wang had already returned, but Li Xian was still here. It looked like he had no intention of leaving. Li Xian said gloomily, Uncle Huang said that sooner or later I will have to manage father's fief. He wants me to stay in the capital and learn these things from the officials of the court. I'm afraid I won't be able to leave the capital in the short term. Li Yi thought to himself that the emperor really was a busybody. He even had to worry about these things. Given the condition of his body, if he wanted to live to the end of his life, it would probably be up to luck. Thinking about it this way, it wasn't surprising to see him discussing Zen with the old monk here. With his temperament, he was absolutely suitable to be an idle prince, and he was even more suitable to be a scientist. Even if he was asked to govern a prefecture, a state, or even a county, it might be a good thing for the people, but he himself would definitely recite, My white hair is 3,000 feet long, and my fate is like a long sorrow, and die of depression. Li Xian didn't continue to ask why Li Yi was in the capital. If he wanted to know, it wouldn't take much effort. However, as he said, none of this was important anymore. The important thing was that with him here, the future would not be so boring. Suddenly, Li Yi thought of something important. He turned around, looked at Li Xian, and said seriously, By the way, don't tell Mingzu that I'm coming to the capital. Why? Li Xian looked at him with confusion. Mingzu was also very bored in the palace. In reality, he had planned to enter the palace today. If she knew that Li Yi had come to the capital, she would probably be very happy. The reason was, of course, if Her Highness knew that he was coming to the capital, she would certainly think of a way to make him stay. There was no doubt about this. Li Yi only treated this trip as a vacation. He didn't think he would stay here for the rest of his life. He had only left home for a few days, but he already missed Rui and Xiao Huan. Even when he saw a strong man on the street, Fang's face would involuntarily appear. This was an illness. He could only recover when he returned home. He sighed and said, To be honest, I'm only staying in the capital for a few days. In a few days, I'll be returning to Qing and Fu. Although it was not very good not to greet her when he came to the capital. After thinking for a long time, Li felt that it was better for the two of them not to meet. The feeling of his life and death being controlled by others was something that Li Yi, who had a soul from the 21st century, was not something that he was used to. Unfortunately, in a feudal dynasty like the Jing Kingdom, the royal family had this kind of power. If there was no need, he didn't want to have anything to do with the royal family. Li Xian was already an exception. If he got involved with the princess further, Li Yi was worried that the days where he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun would be gone forever. Of course, if she was still the cool and disrespectful constable Mingzu, he would be very happy to accept it. So soon, Li Xian couldn't help but showed disappointment on his face. He didn't have the excitement from before. After applying the medicine, the little fatty became excited again. It was the first time he showed off his power in front of his enemy. Even though he was slightly injured, he couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. He held the food in his hand and walked around the room. Suddenly, the little fatty looked at the surrounding walls of the room. His eyes rolled a few times, and he ran in front of Li Yi. He pointed at the strange marks on the wall and asked, "Big brother, what's written on the wall?" Although Li Yi didn't grow up in the capital, he was the number one among the younger generation in the Li family. It was normal for the little fatty to call him Big Brother. After what happened just now, the little fatty was full of good feelings towards this big brother that he had only met twice. Of course, he was more looking forward to having him teach him a few moves. When he fought with Chen Xiaotian, he would be able to send them flying with a kick. Just thinking about it made his blood boil. He, Big Brother, doesn't study hard and can't read. The little girl skipped over and said with a smile. The little girl was also a member of the Li family. She was the daughter of a concubine of the Li family's third uncle. She was Li Yingxi's half-sister. Perhaps it was because she was too young. She was a little shy. She hid behind the little fatty and blinked her eyes curiously at Li Yi. Hearing this, the little fatty's face turned red. Although he didn't study hard, he could still recognize a few words. However, the words written on the wall were crooked and didn't look like they were written in a book. How could he recognize them? That's Sanskrit. It's normal that you don't recognize it, Li Yi said with a smile. You know Sanskrit? Li Xian looked at him in surprise. It was normal for the little fatty not to know Sanskrit. Li Yi grew up in Qing and prefecture. Under normal circumstances, he shouldn't be able to recognize it either. Once again, Li Yi confirmed that this guy must have dozed off in class when he was young. This was a temple. Buddhism originated from ancient India. Although the wheel of history had gone astray, it shouldn't be much different in this world. The earliest scriptures must have been written in Sanskrit. After being translated, it became what it was today. Li Yi had studied history carefully. In the early years of the previous dynasty, there was indeed a monk called Xuanzang who went west to India and brought back countless scriptures. However, it was different from the other world. After Xuanzang returned to his country, the Tang Empire was torn apart before he could translate the scriptures. Xuanzang also died of a serious illness. An eminent monk of that generation had fallen. Until now, those scriptures had not been completely translated. This was a temple. Other than Sanskrit, what else could those strange words written on the wall be? I know a thing or two, Li Yi said modestly without blushing. Of course, he didn't know Sanskrit. Although there were Buddhist classics and even Sanskrit dictionaries in the library, he always felt that it was useless to learn it. Moreover, one couldn't learn a language just by knowing a few words. There was no need to spend so much effort. What's written on the wall? Li Xian looked at him and asked in disbelief. Not only could he write poems and lyrics, he knew a lot of things that he didn't know. But he even knew such an obscure language like Sanskrit. The gap between them was so big that it hurt his heart 10,000 times more. When Bodhisattva Amitabha was deep in the Prajnaparamita, he saw that the 5 skandhas were empty, and he passed through all suffering. Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Perception, thought, action, and knowledge are the same. Li Yi said casually, "This is the Buddhist scripture, Maha Prajnaparamita Sutra. It talks about the path of Bodhisattva. Seeing that his big brother even knew these crooked things, the little fatty's eyes were already shining. Finally, Li Xian's face showed extreme surprise. Although he didn't know Sanskrit, Li Yi's words sounded very professional. Prajnaparamita, Sarira, form, and emptiness sounded very professional. Coupled with his trust in him, he didn't doubt that what he said was a lie. Young benefactor is indeed knowledgeable. In the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang translated the Prajnaparamita Sutra, but he only completed half of it before he reached nirvana. The other half of the sutra is still in our cold mountain temple's sutra depository. I wonder where did young benefactor learn it? An old monk walked in from outside and asked with a smile, "Master Tanin, Could the Sanskrit on the wall really be that sutra? Li Xian walked over and asked the old monk skeptically. The old monk stroked his beard and smiled, shaking his head. That's the Diamond Sutra. Chapter 316. Li Yi was embarrassed. Thinking that Li Xian didn't know Sanskrit, he casually recited the Heart Sutra that Li Xian was most familiar with to fool him. The Heart Sutra was probably one of the most widely circulated scriptures in Buddhism in the future, especially the line's form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form. They often appeared in TV dramas. Even if you weren't a Buddhist, you could say it casually. It was awkward after saying it out loud. Being exposed by the old monk and Li Xian's playful eyes, he was put on the spot for a moment. So I heard. At one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra, together with 1,250 monks. Li Yi laughed dryly and said, "So, it's the Diamond Sutra. I'm sorry, I saw it wrong." Li Xian's face was full of disbelief. The two scriptures were so different. How could he have seen it wrong? Would a normal person think of the immortal Magpie Bridge as Shui Diao Geta? If he was literate, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. So I heard. At one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra. The old monk raised his eyebrows and looked at Li Yi with a serious expression. Could it be the Diamond Sutra translated and annotated by the later Qin monk, Kumarajiva? Legend has it that this translation was recognized by the monks at that time and was widely spread. However, it was lost with the fall of the later Qin dynasty. Where did you learn it? Obviously, what Li Yi just said was not what was written on the wall. The atmosphere in the room became awkward again. Li Yi decided not to speak anymore. This old monk must be taking revenge on him for tricking him earlier. It was said that a monk's 6 senses were pure, without anger, but it was all a lie. He had never seen a monk who held a grudge like this before. "Inkai, let's go home." Li Yi turned and said to the little fatty, then strode out of the room. "Young benefactor, please wait." The old monk stepped forward and blocked his way. With Li Yi's level, he didn't see how the monk came over. He just felt his vision blur, and a shiny bald head appeared in front of him. Li Yi was shocked, thinking that this old monk was not a Shaolin disciple. Could he be a spy of the Xiaoyao sect? This wave-like subtle steps had already reached the acme of perfection. Expert. Li Yi was absolutely certain that this old monk was an expert. However, he wasn't worried, because under the guidance of a servant of the Li family, Mississippi Liu was already walking over. "Is there anything else, Grandmaster?" It was better to be polite in someone else's territory. Even if Mississippi Liu defeated the old monk, Rui wouldn't be able to deal with the 18 Arhats formation, Vajra demon, subduing formation, and so on. A kind smile appeared on the old monk's face again as he asked, "I just want to know where you learned the Prajna Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra that you mentioned just now." Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He finally understood why the old monk would do such a thing. Although the overall history of this world hadn't changed much, there were still many historical differences from the original world. The eminent monk of the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang, traveled thousands of miles from India to retrieve the Mahayana Buddhism, but he died before he could translate it into Chinese. Many Buddhist scriptures could only exist in the form of Sanskrit. With the rapid destruction of India, there were fewer and fewer people who knew Sanskrit. Eminent monks who were proficient in Sanskrit were even rarer. For decades, there hadn't been a mighty person who could translate these scriptures, which greatly hindered the spread of the teachings. The old monk's dharma must have reached a certain level. He could tell the difference just by listening to a few lines of the scriptures. He might have thought that the scriptures had already been translated by an eminent monk. "What's wrong?" Lu Rui walked over. After glancing at the old monk, he stood beside Li Yi and tilted his head to ask. The old monk still had a kind smile on his face, but his gaze lingered on Lu Rui for a moment longer. "I'm fine." Li Yi gave her a reassuring look. Since the old monk didn't have any ill intentions and didn't intend to use the 18 bronze men formation and the diamond demon subduing formation, there was no need to be cautious. He looked at the old monk and smiled. "It's a long story. It was a winter more than 10 years ago. I only remember that it was very cold that winter. The north wind was biting cold, and snow was flying everywhere. One morning, I opened the door to find an old monk in thin clothes lying in front of my house. Perhaps it was because of the climate change, but more than 10 years ago, the winter in Qing in prefecture was much colder than it was now. Every year, there would be a heavy snowfall. The north wind was biting cold, and the snow would seal the mountains. Coincidentally, a famous doctor would fall in front of Li Yi's house this year. Next year, a Buddhist monk would fall, and the year after that, an old Taoist would fall. In short, under the rule of Emperor Li Xian's relatives, the elderly in the Jing kingdom didn't have an easy time, especially during the difficult winter. Fortunately, the people of this era didn't lack warm-hearted people. Every time they found an elderly person lying in front of their house, they would kindly help them back. A bowl of hot soup and a quilt could save an elderly person who had 1 foot in the grave. Because he had the best audience in the world, with Li Yi's ability to tell stories. If he told stories in the brothel, the storytellers could only go hungry. Li Xian listened with great interest. He was very envious of Li Yi's luck of randomly picking up an eminent monk in front of his house. The gate of the prince's mansion was even more majestic and imposing. Why had no one ever fallen? It must be because those servants were too fierce. When he returned this time, he had to properly reorganize the servants in the mansion. So this scripture of yours is what you read from the eminent monk left behind before he left. Li Xian suddenly understood and asked, the scripture written by the eminent monk is of extraordinary value. Where is that scripture now? Li touched his nose and said, once when I was reading in the toilet, I found that the toilet token was gone. I saw that the paper of the scripture was soft, so Li Xian's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Looking at Master Tan Yin's appearance, that scripture must be extraordinary. It was very likely that it was written by an eminent monk of the present age. It was incomparably precious, and its value was immeasurable. Someone actually used such a treasure to wipe. The smile on the old monk's face had already stiffened. His beard could not help but tremble. A hint of redness appeared on his face, and his breathing also began to quicken. As if feeling danger, Li Yi raised his eyebrows and moved a little closer to Li Yi's side. Amiba. After a moment, the old monk's breathing gradually calmed down. He chanted a Buddhist name and then asked, I wonder if the young benefactor remembers the contents of that scripture. Of course, I used that scripture to learn to read. I have long memorized all the scriptures in it. Li used his own experience to verify that the saying that monks were tranquil and emotionless was a lie. This old monk was obviously a person of the eminent monk level. Just now, even his eyes were red. If he said that he did not remember the scripture in the scripture again, 18 monks with sticks all over their bodies would jump out at the next moment. That scripture is very important to my Buddhist sect. This old monk has a presumptuous request. Young benefactor, could you make a copy of those scriptures? In the future, my Buddhist sect will definitely repay you generously. It is also a virtuous deed and will be blessed by Buddha. All the wrinkles on the old monk's face were revealed, and his turbid eyes were full of smiles. He looked even more like an enlightened eminent monk. It's nothing. Master, you are exaggerating. Li Yi smiled, equally extraordinary. With just a few words, the tense atmosphere from before finally disappeared and became incomparably harmonious. Copying scriptures was not something that could be completed in a short time. It would take a few days. Of course, he would not stay in Cold Mountain Temple forever. He made an appointment with the old monk 7 days later. Cold Mountain Temple would send someone down the mountain to retrieve the scripture that Li Yi had copied. A servant from a Li family came to report that old mistress and the others had already left the mountain. The old monk personally sent them out of the temple, which immediately attracted countless people's amazement. They were wondering who those people were and why Master Sandalwood would personally send them off. After all, the last time His Royal Highness Prince of Wei came, he did not receive such treatment. Along the way, Mississippi Lou's expression was not quite right. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back at the old monk. Master, Do you know the thousand-leaf palm of great compassion? The old monk was stunned, then shook his head. What about Arhut fist? The old monk shook his head again. Vajra palm. Ijin Jing? He doesn't even know the 72 ultimate skills. What kind of master is he? Mississippi Lou curled her lips and mumbled before getting into the carriage. Chapter 317. It's the Cold Mountain Temple, a small temple. It's normal that they don't know the 72 ultimate arts. You can't expect any monk to be as powerful as the Dharma Hall of the Shaolin Temple. If there's a chance next time, I'll bring you to the Shaolin Temple. Inside the carriage, Li Yi was comforting Mississippi Lou, who didn't know the 72 ultimate arts of Shaolin. Looking at her disappointed expression, Li Yi suspected that accompanying the old madam was just an excuse, and that she wanted to see the legendary Shaolin Kung Fu. One had to know that in the wuxia stories he had told her, every monk was an expert who looked down on the martial arts world. Fortunately, the old monk really didn't know those Kung Fu. Otherwise, if the two of them were to fight, the Cold Mountain Temple would be torn down. Li looked at her and advised, "Don't ask the master such questions in the future. A monk should keep a low profile. Even if he really knew these Kung Fu, he wouldn't say it out loud." Looking at Mississippi Lou nodding as if she understood his words, Li Yi felt relieved. It seemed that he had misunderstood her. Although Rui had a bad temper, she was not as stubborn as he thought. "Well, since he doesn't want to admit it, I'll just test him next time," Mississippi Lou said as she looked out of the window. Li Yi decided to take back his thoughts. Suddenly, he seemed to realize something. He turned to look at her and asked, I really don't know the thousand-leaf palm of mercy and the Vajra palm. I've never heard of it. There are countless scriptures in the library. Which one is the muscle bone strengthening scripture?" In the Cold Mountain Temple, the old monk looked at his disciples who had bruises all over their faces and asked, "What happened? Why are you all in such a sorry state? Was there a fight in the temple?" A young monk hugged his arms and shed 2 lines of aggrieved tears. He choked and said, "There was a female benefactor just now." Li Yi sighed and said, "Rui, it's better if you don't go to the Cold Mountain Temple anymore. Their 18 bronze men formation and Vajra demon subduing formation are very powerful. Even a grandmaster wouldn't be able to escape easily once they're trapped. Especially the 18 bronze men. They hold iron rods in their hands, and their bodies emit golden light." Mississippi Lou's eyes were full of fighting spirit. "Is that so? I like to see if it's really as powerful as you say it is." The carriage drove into the city gate. Mississippi Lou didn't plan to take the carriage back to the Lee family. She planned to walk back slowly and experience the local customs in the capital. Li Yi did not intend to accompany her, but for the safety of the people in the capital, he got off the carriage. He dismissed the servants who wanted to stay and let them go back with the little fatty. A beautiful young lady walked in front. When she passed by a stall or a shop, she would go in and take a look. 2 handsome young masters followed behind her. A little further away, a few guards lagged far behind. They were not as nervous as they used to be. With Mississippi Lou around, nothing would happen to His Royal Highness. If even she couldn't do it, it would be useless for them to go up. Mississippi Lou had just bought a piece of fashionable cloth. When she saw another shop with more luxurious decorations, she immediately handed the cloth to Li Yi and walked in. Li Xian's bodyguard tactfully walked over and took on the role of a porter. "Do you know, I found a kind of sturdy and light cloth in the capital. It's perfect for making kites. The capital is really not something Qing and prefecture can compare to. There are many good things here. I searched everywhere in Qing and prefecture, but I couldn't find a suitable cloth." As Li Xian walked, he said, "I've tried it before. The kites made from this kind of cloth can stay in the air for a longer period of time. Yesterday, a guard ran down a steep slope and actually flew more than 10 zhang in the air. However, he didn't fly too high. The highest he flew was about 2 zhang above the ground." Li Xian wasn't satisfied with growing wings on his mind. He wanted to plant wings on the guards of the prince's mansion. Fortunately, the guards of the prince's mansion were all experts. Even if they fell from a height of 3 to 2 feet, they would be fine. Otherwise, Prince Ning Mansion would definitely become the largest sanatorium for the disabled in the Jin Kingdom. According to his current knowledge, to be able to do this was already not bad. At the very least, he was in the right direction. He wasn't like that fellow who tied a rocket launcher to a chair and pulled 2 kites in his hands and wanted to fly into the sky. Also, I'm also making the hot air balloon that you mentioned last time. But there's a big problem. The cloth isn't fireproof, and it's very likely to burn. There's also no suitable fuel. Even if I fly, I won't be able to last long. Under the inspiration of Li Xian's thinking had already far surpassed the people of this era. After such a long time, he finally understood that there was only one person in this world who could discuss these things with him. Geniuses were all lonely. Ordinary people couldn't understand the pain of not being able to find a confidant in the entire world. These words had been bottled up in his mind for a long time. Finally, he found someone who was worth talking to and who could understand him. From the beginning, his mouth hadn't closed. The direction is right. The material and fuel for the hot air balloon is indeed the biggest problem. There's something called tung oil. It's very light and heat-resistant. I could try to apply it on the cloth. As for the fuel, there's also something called fierce kerosene. Maybe I can give it a try. Li had discovered a long time ago that Mississippi Lu had no immunity to good-looking cloth. She obviously didn't know how to sew clothes, but every time she went out on the street, she would buy some cloth. Last time, 2 pieces of cloth were bitten by rats. In a fit of anger, she chased the rats out of their holes and tore them into pieces. Accompanying a woman shopping was a very tiring thing. Mississippi Lu entered the cloth shop and couldn't come out for a while. Li casually sat down at a noodle stall next to the cloth shop and continued to complete his plan to cultivate a great scientist. Guest, would you like to eat noodles? A shy voice came from the opposite side. Li raised his head and saw a skinny girl around 10 years old looking at them. The next moment, the little girl was pulled to the back by a woman with a white scarf wrapped around her head. The woman said with a smile, "Children don't know anything. Please rest as much as you want." The 2 young masters in front of them had extraordinary temperaments. The one on the left could probably buy the whole noodle stall with just 1 piece of clothing. How could such nobles eat noodles here? Li saw the little girl hiding behind the woman and looking at them with a wronged expression. He smiled and said, "A bowl of noodles. Put more chopped green onions, no coriander." Having lived 2 lives, he didn't have the habit of not eating on the street. A few months ago, he and Xiao Huan ate a bowl of vegetarian noodles on the street of Qing in Prefecture. It was better than any delicacy. Today, he had eaten something in the morning. He was already hungry. Just thinking of the steaming hot sour noodle soup made his appetite increase. The woman was stunned for a moment, then immediately nodded and said, "Yes, please wait a moment. The noodles will be served soon." The skinny little girl washed a rough porcelain bowl 5 or 6 times before putting it on the table. The woman cooked a bowl of noodles. The noodles were 30% more than usual. She seasoned it, sprinkled a handful of chopped green onions, and immediately brought it over. "Guest, the noodles are ready." It was just a bowl of wheat flour in front of him. There wasn't even a single green vegetable, but it smelled extraordinarily fragrant. Li looked at the woman in surprise. The sauce she had just put in was definitely not ordinary. Li Xian smelled the fragrance and couldn't help swallowing a mouthful of saliva. He hesitated for a moment, then raised his head and said, "Give me a bowl too." A guard came forward and was about to say something when Li Xian waved his hand. He had no choice but to leave. A moment later, at the noodle stall on the side of the street, 2 noblemen with extraordinary temperaments were eating noodles, which became a different kind of scenery on the street. Lu Rui walked out of the cloth shop with a roll of cloth in his arms and saw such a scene. Chapter 3:18. Lu Rui had used half a year to prove one thing. Anything that Li liked to eat would definitely taste good. Therefore, after a while, there was another beautiful young lady sitting at the noodle stall eating noodles on the side of the street, in addition to the 2 noble young masters with extraordinary bearing. The lady stood in the stall, rubbing her hands nervously. The stall had always served uncouth people. Even if they were slightly noble, they wouldn't eat noodles here. She couldn't handle the scene in front of her. The skinny little girl had a faint smile on her face, revealing two cute canine teeth. If she wasn't too skinny and didn't have much flesh on her face, she would also be a beautiful little girl. "Madam, give me another bowl." Lee put down the bowl. He had even finished the soup, but he still felt like he hadn't had enough. Even he himself was curious why he had such a special liking for the noodles of this noodle stall. He felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had eaten it a long time ago, and more than once. It was rare for a distinguished guest to eat her family's noodles. The lady responded, and the smile on her face grew wider. She hurried to prepare the noodles. Li Xian cast a disdainful look at Li Yi's behavior. He had received the etiquette of the royal family since he was young. He only ate until he was 70% full. No matter how much he liked the food, he wouldn't eat a second bowl. He wiped his mouth, pushed the empty bowl to the side, and said, "Madam, cook another bowl. I want more noodles." Just now, he clearly saw that the noodles in Li Yi's bowl were at least 20% more than his. How could a dignified heir lose to him in this kind of thing? When he ate the second bowl of noodles, Li Yi slowed down. After all, although the bowl was a little small, the amount was not little. He looked up at the lady and asked, "The sauce that Madam just put in should be a secret recipe passed down in your family, right?" Li Yi had eaten a lot of noodles in his 2 lives, so he was quite knowledgeable about it. The noodles could only be considered average, but the soup was really delicious. It was not inferior to the famous old restaurants in his previous life. In the past, those elegant young masters would never look her in the eye when they passed by. The woman had never met such a kind noble before. She smiled and nodded, saying, "Noble's guess is correct. This sauce has been passed down from our ancestors for several decades." "Looks like it's an old shop." Li Yi smiled and said, "The taste of this noodles is inexplicably familiar. I feel like I've eaten it somewhere before." "You're not from the capital, are you?" the woman asked. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't call me nobleman anymore. I'm really not from Beijing." Then, young master must have remembered wrongly. Our ancestors were all in the capital, and this secret recipe has never been shown to anyone. It's impossible for young master to have eaten it anywhere else. The nervousness in the woman's heart had almost disappeared. When talking about the secret recipe, she couldn't help but say a few more words. Li Yi didn't continue the question. Perhaps he really had eaten similar noodles before, but it was in another world. After all, there was already a bowl of noodles at the bottom. This time, he only ate half of the noodles and finished the soup. Li Xian rubbed his bulging stomach and imitated the woman to drink the soup. If this scene was seen by the imperial censor, he would at least reprimand him for losing his royal bearing. The woman began to clean the bowls and chopsticks while the little girl wiped the tables and chairs with a cloth. The weather was still cold after the Lantern Festival, but her forehead was covered in a fine layer of sweat. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly came from the side. A large foot immediately appeared on the table that the little girl had just wiped. What followed was a strong smell of foot odor. "Lady He, it's time to pay the membership fee." He covered his nose and looked at the rough man, as if he was looking at a gas bomb. Mississippi Lu had the fastest reaction. She had already pinched her nose and moved far away. The big man's foot was placed on the table next to Li Xian, less than a foot away. Li clearly saw his face turn from red to white and then green. Then, he suddenly turned his head and covered his mouth to retch. Seeing him so disgusted that tears were about to flow down, Li Yi secretly sighed. He had eaten the noodles just now for nothing. When seeing the big man, the little girl's face turned pale, and she quickly ran behind the woman. The woman's face was pale. She looked at the big man and said in a trembling voice, "Master who? Didn't we just pay this morning? Why, stop talking nonsense." The big man impatiently waved his hand and said, "This is my territory. I can collect whenever I want and however many times I want. If your noodle stall wants to continue operating here, then give me the money." He looked at this scene in surprise. The security in the capital of the country was actually so bad under the emperor's feet. How could the people collecting protection fees be so brazen? If this was in Qing, in prefecture, which ruffian would dare to be so arrogant? They would have been beaten half to death by Lu Yi. Ever since he discovered the dark phenomenon of collecting protection fees in the city. Under Li Yi's instigation, Lu Yi had thoroughly reorganized the ruffians and idlers in the city. He invited them to the county office for tea for a few days, and after that, there were no more cases of protection fees. Instead, a group of burly men could often be seen picking up trash on the streets. The hygiene of the city had immediately improved a lot. It was said that the magistrate had specially praised County Magistrate Lu for this and listed him as a role model for other counties to learn from. The woman said with a bitter face, "Master Hu, I really don't have any money. You took all the money this morning. We only did business with a few customers this morning. We really don't have any money. No money. Let me see." The burly man called Tiger Lord kicked over the table in front of him and jumped inside. He picked up a worn-out wooden box on the ground. After opening it, he picked out a few copper coins from inside and casually threw the wooden box on the ground. He said, "Damn, it's my bad luck to have met a poor ghost like you." Lu Rui frowned. Just as she was about to walk over, she stopped in her tracks when she saw an officer patrolling the streets not far away. "What are you doing?" Seeing the patrol officer walking over from afar, the man waved his hand and said, "Brother Song, it's nothing. Do what you need to do. I'll treat you to a drink tonight. Don't go overboard." The patrol officer said, waved his hand, and turned to leave. He was dumbfounded. Was this really the capital city? Could the collusion between officials and bandits be more obvious? No wonder the woman did not look happy when she saw the patrol officer walking over. Instead, she turned even paler. It turned out that the officials were in cahoots with the people collecting protection fees. The man took the copper coin, cursed inwardly, and was about to leave. However, someone would not let him leave so quickly. Li Xian's eyes seemed to be spewing fire. He kicked the man away. A long time ago, Li knew that while he looked gentle and weak on the surface, he was actually quite skilled. At that time, when he had forcefully dragged him to Ning Wang Fu, he had no power to resist at all. Who the F*** CK? The man was quite powerful. He got up from the ground in a roll and cursed. Before he turned around, he was sent flying again. Li Xian pinched his nose. He did not want to go near that guy anymore. He waved his hand and retreated to Li Yi's side. Most of the time, Li Yi wondered if he had a split personality. When he was serious, he could be elegant and polite, making it impossible for anyone to find fault with him. But when he was hedonistic, he was the standard spoiled brat, swaggering through the streets with a bunch of lackeys. With just a wave of his hand, 2 guards would walk over and trample on the man like a human sandbag. Seeing the elegant young master suddenly become so fierce, the overlord of this generation, Master Hu could only hug his head and beg for mercy. The woman's mouth was wide open, and she could not come back to her senses for a while. The little girl clutched the corner of her mother's clothes tightly. Tears were still hanging in the corner of her eyes. She stared blankly at the man rolling on the ground and clenched her fists. Chapter 319. Li Xian's face was extremely pale. He held onto the wall with one hand and occasionally retched a few times. Li Yi believed that he wasn't being so cruel to that Tiger Lord because he wanted to help the weak. When he ate until his stomach was round, the first thing he smelled was the pungent smell. It was already good enough that he didn't vomit out his gallbladder. That bastard, how many months had it been since he washed his feet? "Young master, you can't hit him, you can't hit him." The woman rushed out of the noodle shop with a panicked expression. Li Yi looked at the woman and asked with a frown, "How can there be such ruffians in the capital? Don't the officials care?" "You can't hit him, you really can't hit him." The woman was flustered and hurriedly said, "Young masters, you should leave this place quickly. When the officials come, you won't be able to leave. These ruffians were only robbing some copper coins. How could they compare to the officials? If they fell into the hands of the officials, they would lose their lives." The anger on Li Xian's face was difficult to quell. He coldly said, "I really don't plan on leaving today. I want to see what they can do to me." Because of the special status of the members of the royal family, Their every action represented the face of the royal family. Thus, the royal family had very strict restrictions on them. They absolutely couldn't bully the commoners. Otherwise, the censor's impeachment would definitely fly to the emperor's desk like snowflakes. Of course, although they couldn't bully others, they couldn't be bullied by others either. Bullying the kind-hearted members of the royal family would at most be punished. Bullying the royal family wasn't a big crime. At most, they would be beheaded. Seeing that the young master in front of her was determined, the woman's expression became even more anxious. This noble was obviously of extraordinary birth, but how could he be compared to that huge monster? She couldn't drag him down. "You two stop." Two loud shouts came from not far away. Several patrolling bailiffs quickly ran over. Without the crown prince's orders, the two guards wouldn't stop. The fact that the person who offended the crown prince could still scream in pain was simply a humiliation to them. With this thought in mind, the two of them exerted more strength in their hands and feet. Which thug dares to commit murder in the middle of the street? Stop right now, or don't blame us for being impolite. The leader of the group was the constable with the surname Song, whom they had just met. Before he even walked over, he had already heard the classic sayings of a constable. Clang! The 5 bailiffs drew their swords and surrounded the two of them. "Stop!" Li Xian walked over and said calmly. Only then did the 2 guards stop and turn around to look at the bailiffs who had surrounded them. "Who are you?" Constable Song asked. He knew that the person in front of him was the most important person in this group. Li Xian said coldly, "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that this bully is doing evil in the street. As an official, why don't you do anything and let him bully this mother and son?" When Constable Song heard this, he felt extremely depressed. This Madhav Asterisker was just another busybody. If Wang Hu dared to do this to anyone else, he would have been arrested and sent to the government office to have his legs broken. However, the He mother and son were not on that list. The higher-ups had already instructed them to turn a blind eye to their affairs. All the ruffians on the street knew that they could come here to withdraw money when they needed it. As long as they didn't go overboard, the government wouldn't do anything to them. "Umph. With which eye did you see them being bullied?" Constable Song also snorted and said, "I only saw the two of you committing murder in the middle of the street. It was a very bad influence. Come with us to the government office." At the side, Li Yi finally noticed something different. This group of bailiffs and the group of bullies lying on the ground were obviously targeting the mother and son, and they must have some backing. In a place like the capital, there were countless pairs of eyes watching everything you did. If you saw a young master coming out of a brothel on the street, he would either be the only son of a prime minister or the heir of a duke's family. If Constable Song was so arrogant to everyone, he wouldn't have survived until now. However, this time, it was obvious that he had made a mistake. Constable Song didn't think that he had made a mistake. The waters of the capital were very deep. Unlike in other places, where even a small bailiff could do as he pleased in the countryside, in this place where nobility was everywhere and anyone he picked was a relative of the emperor, he naturally had to be careful. Otherwise, he might lose his head one day. Therefore, Constable Song was very clear about those people who couldn't be provoked. He even had a small booklet to record their names and pay attention to them on a daily basis. He also knew what they looked like. Of course, this person in front of him wasn't one of them. In fact, there were many people like this who were nosy before. However, when he realized that the county magistrate didn't even give face to a marquis, he knew what kind of backing they had. "I'm the one who got you into trouble." The woman's face was pale. In the end, there was only bitterness left on her face. In fact, when Master Hu appeared at the noodle stall, many heads popped out from the shops on the street. They secretly cursed in their hearts. They didn't know who this lady from the He family had offended, but all the bullies on the street picked on her and bullied her. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was after so many years. This time, she might not be able to keep the money she earned from selling the noodle. However, things didn't develop as they usually did. Wang Hu was kicked away by the thin and weak young master. He was punched and kicked like a dead dog. The young master was in big trouble now that the constables were here. In the past, There were also people who wanted to help the lady from the He family, but they all ended up in a miserable state. I really want to see which way the main gate of the capital county government opens. Li Xian stopped the guard from revealing his identity. He crossed his arms and said with interest, "The constables didn't treat them as ordinary people. After all, they didn't take the county government seriously. They must be people of high status. They might not be able to offend the person who caused trouble for the He family, but they definitely could afford to offend Constable Song." As a result, a strange scene appeared on the street. A group of people walked in the direction of the county government. The two young masters in front were strolling leisurely, talking and laughing. The woman behind them was holding the little girl's hand. Her face was pale. A few constables followed behind as if they were escorting them. It was often said that it was difficult to be an official in the capital city. Those who were officials in the capital city were all outstanding among the country's officials. They were the true pillars of the country. It was not an exaggeration to say that they brought honor to their ancestors. Of course, this did not include the county magistrate of the capital city. Although the county magistrate of the capital city was the county magistrate in name, he was still under the rule of the emperor. His rank was very high, equivalent to or even slightly higher than the magistrate of the other provinces. However, no matter how high his rank was, it couldn't hide the awkward status of the county magistrate of the capital city. The reason was simple. The capital city was the capital of a country. It was where the imperial city was located. There were countless princes and nobles. From the beginning to the end of the street, there were several officials who had a higher rank than the county magistrate. Chun Yu was such a good-for-nothing county magistrate. He was just over 40 years old and had a lot of white hair on his temples. It had been 3 years since he was promoted to the county magistrate of the capital city. At this time, Chun Yu was worried about a case. The young master of the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the young master of the Duke of Wei fought over a girl in a brothel. The guards of the two families teamed up and tore down the brothel. Now he had to decide which of the two was guilty. How the hell was he supposed to decide? No matter which one it was, he couldn't afford to offend them. The only thing he could do was to smooth things over. As for the brothel, it was the bad luck of the madam. Just as he was feeling vexed, a constable came to report that there was a new case. Chapter 320. What case? Chun Yu asked impatiently. I think it's about the lady from the He family. I'm not sure about the details. Constable Song has brought her back and is waiting outside. All right. You can leave now. I'll be right there. Chun Yu waved his hand and said. The matter between the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the Duke of Wei Kingdom had not been resolved yet. Now, there was another trivial matter that needed to be dealt with. Chun Yu was filled with regret. If he knew that being a county magistrate in the capital city would be like this, he would not have used the power of his family to get this position 3 years ago. It would have been better to be a free magistrate in another state. There was no trifling matter at the foot of the emperor. Any ordinary case in the capital city could reach the ears of the emperor. If it was not handled well, the magistrate might be sent back to his hometown. It's that lady with the surname He again. Chun Yu frowned. He stood up and walked out. Although he was the county magistrate of the capital city, he was also a branch of the Chun family. If it was not for the support of the House of Duke, he would not be where he was today. Of course, he had to pay attention to the things that they asked him to do. Chun Yu had heard about what happened 20 years ago. There was a noble family that had a marriage alliance with the House of Duke. Before the wedding, the eldest son of the family eloped with a commoner girl. This caused the House of Duke to lose face and became the laughingstock of the wealthy families in the capital city. The lady from the Chun family never married. Until now, she was still living in the House of Duke. Now that the High Duke's public house was like the sun in the sky, the other noble family that was once prominent was gradually declining, and the woman's family was also affected. Due to certain reasons, the High Duke's public house could not be too ruthless, but they would not let them off easily either. Chun Yu was ordered by the House of Duke to take care of the He family for the past 3 years. The hall of the county government was actually a very dignified place. There was a huge horizontal board hanging in the center of the hall with the words "Mirror of Eminence hangs high." 2 rows of bailiffs stood solemnly on both sides of the hall with water and fire sticks in their hands. As soon as the county magistrate hit the gavel, they would keep hitting the ground with the sticks and say "mighty" to directly attack the psychological defense of the criminal. He was already used to all of this, so he wasn't affected in the slightest. Needless to say, Li Xian, even the second young miss of the Liu family, was sizing up the decorations here as she commented on them. The capital was indeed the capital. The main hall of the county yamen exuded an atmosphere of grandeur, much grander than the Anxi County yamen. As for the woman and the little girl, they weren't so calm. The woman's face was pale, but she could barely maintain her composure. The little girl tugged at the corner of her mother's clothes, and her big bright eyes were filled with panic. "Little sister, what's your name?" Li Yi walked to her side, squatted down, and said with a smile, "These bastards, if such a little girl is scared, it will probably leave a psychological shadow for the rest of her life." The little girl bit her lips. After a long time, she said softly, Duanwu, what nice name. You treated me to noodles just now. Now, I'll treat you to something, okay? Li Yi said, looking at her. The little girl shook her head, looked at him, and said timidly, "To eat noodles, you have to pay for it." "Duanwu, what are you talking about?" The woman pulled her behind her and hurriedly said to Li Yi, "Young master, don't listen to her." Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned, and then he laughed. He turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Do you have money with you? You forgot to pay for the noodles just now." Of course, Li Xian wouldn't bring money with him. A guard who was perceptive handed him an ingot in time. "Mother, change." As if influenced by Li Yi, the little girl wasn't as scared as before. She took the ingot and handed it to her mother. She had only seen broken silver before, and she knew that whenever a customer paid with such things, her mother would always get back a lot of copper coins. "You're so rude. Return the money." When the woman scolded the little girl with a straight face, Li Yi waved his hand and took out a paper bag from his chest. After opening it, he placed it in front of the little girl and said, "Can I treat you to something now?" Inside the paper bag was the candied plums that the little fatty had given him. In exchange, Li Yi had to hide the fact that he was fighting outside. As for the bruises on his face, the official explanation was that he fell down. Of course, this fall had to be very skillful. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to fall like this without 8 to 10 years of martial arts. The little fatty might be gifted, it just depended on whether his parents believed it or not. It had to be said that the little fatty was quite accomplished in the art of eating. The candied plums that he gave to Li Yi were the best of the best. Smelling the fragrance of the candied plums, the little girl swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but she didn't immediately reach out her hand. She looked up at him, and a trace of desire flashed in her eyes. She asked, "Do I need money?" "This is Big Brother's treat. It's free," Li Yi said with a smile. "Thank you, Big Brother." The little girl finally reached out her hand and only took one piece. She split it in half and handed the extra half to the woman. She turned back to look at Li Yi and said, "Next time, I'll treat Big Brother to noodles. It's free." The surrounding bailiffs were all dumbfounded. They had never seen such an arrogant person in court. Not to mention that he was chatting and laughing. He was even eating now. Did he even put them in his eyes? But what was the little girl eating? It smelled so good, and they really wanted to try it. They secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but none of the bailiffs dared to do so. Those who dared to be so presumptuous in court were either crazy or really had something to rely on. It was obviously not the former, who could bring guards with him. They just needed to pretend that they didn't see it. It was better to leave the trouble to the county magistrate. Li Xian was surprised to see this. Finally, he couldn't help but pull Li Yi aside and asked, "Did you know this little girl before?" "It's my first time seeing her." Li Yi shook his head. Li Xian looked even more puzzled. It was the first time he saw Li Yi being so friendly to a stranger. He asked suspiciously, "Don't tell me that you have feelings for this little girl." "Get lost." Li Yi spat out a word unceremoniously. This guy's mind was too dirty. She was just a child. His good impression of this little girl came entirely from an inexplicable sense of intimacy. Perhaps seeing her appearance had triggered some memories. After all, when he was young, he had also suffered a lot. For the time being, he would just take it that she was more to his liking. Li Xian looked at the little girl curiously again. He took out a piece of candied fruit from the paper bag in Li Yi's hand. Just as he threw it into his mouth, an angry rebuke came from the front. "How dare you? The court is not a restaurant. Who are you? How dare you be presumptuous in court?" Seeing the middle-aged man in official robes walk out from the back of the hall, Li Xian slowly swallowed the candied fruit and wiped his mouth. Only then did he raise his head to look at the man and say, "Today, I saw an evil tyrant bullying the good on the street, yet the officials didn't care and even helped the tyrant commit his crimes. I read the books of the sages. Although I'm a commoner, I still have a sense of righteousness. I would like to ask Lord Magistrate, in the capital city, under the feet of the Son of Heaven, is there still law? Books of sages? Commoners?" Li Yi was stunned. He looked at Li Xian and then at the middle-aged official in the court. He was speechless for a moment. "Did the sages teach you to be presumptuous in court?" Chen Yu's eyes flashed. He slammed the gavel and said loudly, Chapter 321. Chen Yu was the magistrate of the capital city, so he naturally knew who he couldn't provoke. He also knew those nobles, especially those who didn't have to give face to Duke Chen's mansion. They claimed to be commoners and looked unfamiliar, but they claimed to be scholars. Their faces were full of righteousness, as if they were seeking justice for the people. Chen Yu had been an official for many years and had seen too many scholars like this. The current emperor attached great importance to the imperial examinations and recruited scholars from all over the world. It could be said that he had paved a broad road for scholars in the Jing kingdom. Countless scholars from poor families, after 10 years of hard work, were entrusted with important tasks once they passed the examinations. In their lifetime, there were countless who became part of the imperial court. These young people who read the books of sages boasted that they were righteous and fearless. Of course, there were also a group of people who liked to meddle in other people's business. Disrespecting the court should have been punished with flogging as a warning to others. Seeing that you are scholars, I will forgive you this once. Chen Yu sat on the main seat and said calmly, "Scholars like to meddle in other people's business and were the most difficult to deal with. One or two of them wouldn't be a problem, but if they gathered together and blocked the county yamen, regardless of whether they had a reason or not, it would be enough to make him, the magistrate of the capital city, suffer." Hearing the words of the official in the court, the woman immediately pulled the little girl to kneel. Scholars didn't have to kneel in the court, but if they didn't understand etiquette, they would be punished. "Constable Song, what happened? Tell me in detail," Chen Yu said again. Chen Yu spoke up once more. No matter how biased he was in secret, he still had to act like he was going by the book. "My lord, this subordinate was patrolling the streets as usual. When we discovered that there were people fighting on the side of the street, we immediately went forward to stop them. Who would have thought that the culprit would not listen to our advice and had no regard for the law?" Constable Song had a righteous expression and a dutiful expression on his face. He pointed at Li Xian's 2 bodyguards and then pointed at the battered man that was carried back by the 2 bailiffs. He said, "These are the 2 thugs and the victim." Nonsense. It's obvious that this evil man robbed the mother and daughter of their money. As officials, you didn't do anything about it. It's obvious that you're colluding with him. You're in cahoots with him. Li Xian looked up at the man in the hall and asked, "Are all the people in the county government this kind of people who don't care about the lives of the people?" Seeing Li Xian's righteousness, as if he really was a scholar who was pleading for the people, Li Yi felt that if there was a Best Actor award in this world, there would definitely be a spot for him. He didn't use his identity as a prince, but pretended that he didn't have any background. There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. No matter how he looked at it, the forehead of the official in the court was faintly black, and he would be in trouble soon. "How dare you?" Chen Yu slammed the gavel and said angrily. He stared at the woman in the audience with bright eyes and asked, "Madam He, tell me, did someone want to rob you and your daughter of their money?" The woman turned her head and looked at Li Xian with deep regret in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "No." She knew that if she told the truth, it would end up harming the two young masters. Wasn't twisting the truth the best thing these officials did? Chen Yu walked to the audience and looked at Li Xian. He said, "Even she denied it. What else do you have to say?" Li Xian looked at the woman with a thoughtful expression. "Men, arrest these two lawless villains who are fighting in the street and give them 50 strokes of the cane." Chen Yu waved his hand and looked at Li Xian. He said again, "Keep your servants in check in the future. If it happens again, I won't let it go easily. You dog official, you're really in cahoots with these guys." Rui said coldly. If Li Yi hadn't stopped him, he would have pulled out his sword and cut off the dog official's head. Li Yi looked bitter. He decided not to tell Mississippi Lou those martial arts stories anymore. She didn't learn the good ones, but always learned those messy things. Killing dog officials and eliminating evil officials were the work of the Condor hero. What did it have to do with her, the deadly fairy? Chen Yu's face was a little pale. He had been an official for many years and had never been called a dog official. Before he could lose his temper, a jade waste token appeared in front of him. The supervisory censor of Jiangyi province. Chen Yu was shocked. He looked at the jade token carefully, and his face suddenly changed. The supervision system of the Jing Kingdom was mostly inherited from the previous dynasty. The supervisory censor was in charge of supervising the officials, patrolling the counties, and correcting the prisons. Although they were not high-ranking officials, they had a wide range of authority. Princesses, princes, nobles, and officials were all afraid of these censors. Even if Lord Chun did something wrong, these censors could still not give him face, let alone a small capital magistrate. However, when did the supervisory censor of Jiangyi province change? And he was such a young man. The token that represented his identity could not be fake. Chen Yu's face changed, and he said with a smile, "I didn't know you were coming, supervisor. I didn't go out to greet you, say no more." Li Xian waved his hand impatiently and said, "I'll report what I've seen and heard today to His Majesty." "Take care, Your Excellency." The supervisory censor had the right to meet the emperor directly. Chen Yu felt his vision go black, and his body swayed a few times. Immediately, a runner came over and supported him in time. Since he was the supervisor, why didn't he say so earlier? He had obviously dug a big hole for him to jump into. If Chen Yu knew what the entrapment law enforcement was, he would not have been so careless. Unfortunately, it was all too late now. Seeing that the few people had left the hall, Chen Yu forced himself to stand up straight and said hurriedly, "Prepare the carriage. We're going to Lord Chen's mansion." "How did you become the supervisor?" Li Yi asked Li Xian in surprise outside the county government. "It's just a convenient identity. The capital is not like Qing Mansion. With this token, it will be much easier to get things done," Li Xian said. Li looked at him enviously. He had to admit that His Majesty treated him very well. The emperor had even thought of this. Although the supervisory censor was a low-ranking official, he was in charge of a lot of things. He could even manage the affairs of the royal family. The emperor treated him like his own son. No, even the emperor's own son did not have such preferential treatment. "Don't worry. Since I've come across this matter, I will definitely get to the bottom of it." Li Xian turned around and said to the mother and daughter, Thank you, Your Excellency." The situation had turned around so quickly that the woman had not yet recovered from the shock. Hearing Li Xian's words, she hurriedly bowed and said, although she did not know who this excellency was, a glimmer of hope was ignited in her heart when he saw that even the county magistrate did not give face to him. Now that things had developed to this point, it was clear that the mother and daughter were no longer involved. Perhaps it was because he had been disgusted earlier, but Li Xian was obviously very serious about this matter. It was better for the county magistrate to clean up his mess. Otherwise, he would not be able to escape this time. Li Yi had rejected the invitation to visit his late son's mansion. There was still a matter at home that had not been taken care of. The chubby boy thought that his plan was flawless and wanted to use the excuse of falling to get away. At this time, no one knew what kind of torture he was suffering. Li Yi also had a part in this matter, so it was only right for him to share some of the burden. As expected, not long after he stepped into the Li mansion, the chubby boy's howl came from one of the halls. Although the Li family has declined, we are not a family that can be easily bullied by others. Our Li family has let them down for what happened back then. However, we have already repaid what should be repaid after all these years. The only person we owe is that child from the Chun family. At this time, the old woman who had been silent all this while stood up and said, "This matter was the Chun family who broke the rules first. Inkai didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Yer. This is a matter between children. If the Chun family still cares about their reputation, they won't pursue it. As for Yer's friend, it's his first time in the capital. Why would he have a friend here? I met him in Qing, in prefecture. It was a coincidence that I bumped into him in the capital this time." Li walked in from outside and explained, "Yi and Rui are back." The old mistress smiled and said, "If it wasn't for Yi today, Inkai would have been at a disadvantage. We are all family, so we should help each other." The old mistress had lived for a lifetime. From the glory days of the Li family until now, she had seen too many things. She knew the root of a family's longevity. She was actually very satisfied with Li Yi's actions today. Yes. Big Brother's Kung Fu is amazing. You must teach me. The next time I see Chan Xiao Dian, I can send him flying with one kick." Seeing Li Yi, the chubby boy was obviously in high spirits. He ran over excitedly and said, the scene he saw on a mountain was still deeply engraved in his mind. Hiss! Before he could finish, he sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. Lady Yin pulled his ear and dragged him back. Lady Fong laughed coldly and said in a strange tone, "Ha! Inkai didn't lose out, but we have offended the Chun family again." That year, Big Brother abandoned the third daughter of the Chun family and ran away, causing the two families to become enemies. Now, Big Brother's family and the Chun family probably have a feud for generations. Knowing that she had always held a grudge against Big Brother's family, Li Mingze frowned slightly. In front of so many people, he couldn't reprimand her. He turned to look at Li Yi and said, "In a few days, I will think a way to move around and see if I can transfer you to the capital. However, the capital is not like Qing in prefecture. In the future, remember not to be so impulsive." Li could feel that although this second aunt seemed to be dissatisfied with him, he really didn't take it to heart. After all, it wasn't like he hadn't seen second aunt before. He had long been immune to her. However, they had only known each other for a day, but this dignified man in front of him was so protective of him. He really was like an elder in the family, which made him feel slightly touched. As for the transfer, Li Yi didn't say much. Although he was only a small county lieutenant, no one could transfer this position unless the emperor said so. Li Yi felt that it was good to be an idle county lieutenant in Qing in prefecture. He could train a few capable subordinates and live a perfect life with only a salary and no work. Wasn't it much easier than working hard in the capital? It would be best if His Majesty had long forgotten about him. This ideal would become reality. Thinking about it, the emperor was very busy. He had to deal with thousands of affairs in the day and thousands of concubines at night. Anyway, he was very busy during the day and night. He was just a small character, so he probably wouldn't care about him. All right, it's best to let your friend in the capital leave the capital as soon as possible. If he is found by Duke Chun, I'm afraid it will be very troublesome. Li Mingze reminded again. In his view, Li Yi's friend naturally wouldn't be someone powerful. He was far from being able to compete with Duke Chun. Li Yi nodded, but he didn't take this matter to heart. Whether Li Xian left the capital was naturally not something he could control. It would be fine if they didn't investigate. If Duke Chun found out about him, who knew who would be in trouble? Investigate. We must find out who they are. In Duke Chen's mansion, a few guards with broken legs were lying in rows outside, wailing in pain. A beautiful woman pointed at the few people in the room and said loudly. She looked at the young boy in her arms with a swollen face and tears in his eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "The Li family. It's the Li family again. 20 years ago, They made our Chun family lose face. Today, they treat my son like this. I will not let you go. Where is Chunyu? Let him handle this matter. He will go to the Li family to seek justice for my son. Beside her, a middle-aged man looked at the guards wailing outside the door. His face was also gloomy. Liqing, other than the Li family, have you found out the identities of the others? The middle-aged man looked at Chun Liqing, who was standing there with his head lowered, and asked calmly. Hearing this, Chun Liqing trembled and immediately said, I only know that there's a person named Li Yi from Qing province. I don't know what relationship he has with the Li family. As for the person who ordered the guards to break one of their legs, I haven't found him yet. The middle-aged man's frown deepened. At this moment, someone walked in quickly and whispered a few words in Chun Liqing's ear. Hearing this, Chun Liqing immediately walked in front of the middle-aged man and said again, I've found out. The young man named Li Yi is the eldest grandson of the Li family who just returned. He is the son of the eldest son, Li Minghan, who left the Li family 20 years ago. A few days ago, the Li family had been sending people to search for him. He only arrived in the capital yesterday. Just as Chun Liqing finished speaking, a strange sound came from behind the screen in the hall. The face of the woman behind the screen was pale. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Blood dripped down her palms, but she didn't notice. Chapter 323. What? You're saying? Li Minghan is back? Hearing Chun Liqing's words, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed and his expression darkened. Yes, I heard this from a servant of the Li family. It shouldn't be wrong, Chun Liqing said apprehensively as he looked up at the middle-aged man. Seeing the expression on his uncle's face, he knew that the rumors about the grudge between the Chun and Li family 20 years ago were probably true. The gorgeous woman raised her head and said fiercely, Li Minghan and that bitch still dare to come back. Not just us, but the Li family probably can't tolerate them anymore. Will Li Mingza return the position of family head to him? Even if he's willing, the Li family won't be willing, right? Li Minghan left all those years ago and delayed my little sister for 20 years. Now that he's back, let's settle old and new debts together. The middle-aged man said gloomily. When he said that name, there was an unconcealable disgust on his face. Don't tell my little sister about this for now. Let Chinyu go directly to the Li family to arrest them. There's evidence, and no one else can say anything. When a middle-aged man looked at the guard with a broken leg, his eyes suddenly flashed with a cold light. If one of these people had died from their injuries, things would have been much easier to deal with. Although the Li family had declined, they were once a prominent family that couldn't be underestimated. Even if the Chun family wanted to target them, they couldn't do so unscrupulously and would meet with great resistance. If not for this, the Li family would have been pushed out of the capital long ago. Humph. Chinyu can't even protect himself now. A cold snort sounded from the door. Another middle-aged man with a dignified expression walked in. Behind him was the pale-faced Chinyu. Chun Guogong was already old, and he was more of a deterrent in the Chun family. The person in charge of the daily affairs of the Chun family was the current Chun Guogong's eldest son, Chun Qing. How is this possible? Chinyu is doing a good job as the Chun family magistrate. Why would Big Brother say this? Could it be that someone is targeting the Chun family? Chen Chong said in shock. Losing a capital order was nothing to the Chun family, but knowing that Chunyu was a member of the Chun family, they still wanted to make a move on him. The meaning behind this was not ordinary. I heard that little Tian and the rest had a conflict with someone outside. Chen Qing didn't answer but asked a question instead. Big Brother, you have to seek justice for little Tian. The beautiful woman wiped her tears and said, Look at how little Tian and the others were beaten by the Li family. Also, my Chun family's guards all had one of their legs broken. This is not beating them, but slapping our Chun family's face. I'm afraid it's not just the Li family, right? Chen Qing asked again. The woman said with a face full of resentment, Yes, if they didn't have an accomplice, we wouldn't have suffered such a big loss. That person didn't put our Chun Guagong public house in his eyes at all. I've already sent people to investigate. I won't let him go so easily. Chun Qing sneered and said, of course they wouldn't put our Chun family in their eyes. His Majesty's body is unwell, and the princes and princesses are all praying for His Majesty. Ningguang Shitzi and Shitzi Fei are also in Jing City. Today, they went to Cold Mountain Temple and were offended by this group of blind dogs. Tell me, who would you not easily let off? What they are? How is this possible? The beautiful woman's face suddenly turned pale when she heard this. She said in disbelief, could it be that those servants whose legs were broken had offended Prince Ning and his wife today? Chun Qing glanced at them and said, I've told you long ago that we will get back at the Li family for my little sister's grievances. There's no need to cause trouble for the He family. Yet for this small matter, you've dragged Qinyu into it as well, bending the law for personal gain to the supervisor of Jiangyi province. I'm afraid Qinyu's position in the capital has come to an end. Everything that the Chun family has done for him over the past few years has gone down the drain. A bitter smile appeared on Qinyu's face. With the current situation, he couldn't intervene. Qinyu has been in office for 3 years and hasn't made any major mistakes. He won't lose his position because of this matter, right? Chun Chong hesitated and said, moreover, the Chun family has influence in the imperial censor. Why don't we send someone to the supervisor of the imperial censors? We should. Chun Qing looked at him and asked, His Majesty just appointed Prince Ning as the supervisor of Jiangyi province 2 days ago. This morning, he was offended by that group of servants. Just now, you were still thinking about how to not let him go. How do you think we should do that? This. Qin Shong was stumped for words. Although the Chun family was one of the top nobles in the capital, all of this was given by the imperial family. If they were to clash with the imperial family, they wouldn't end up well. If it was an ordinary clash, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, this wasn't Prince Ning's territory. In terms of strength, the Chun family was stronger. However, the crown prince and his wife were praying for His Majesty. If this matter was blown out of proportion, it wouldn't just be a conflict with the crown prince. Let's drop this matter for now. Send someone to prepare a generous gift and personally deliver it to the crown prince's residence. Tell them that it was the evil servants of the family who offended His Highness. Apologize to them carefully. As for Qinyu's matter, don't mention it again. The only thing the Chun family could do now was to lower their stance as much as possible. As for Qinyu's fate, it would depend on how the crown prince wanted to deal with it. As for the Li family, they didn't know what kind of relationship they had with the crown prince's residence. The power structure in the capital was very complicated. If a single move was made, it would affect everything. Chun Qing said a few words in a low voice and said, for the time being, keep the matter of Li Mingan's return to the capital a secret from Third Sister. Tell them to watch their mouths. If even the slightest bit of information is leaked, they will not be let off lightly. When Chun Qing said this sentence, a figure had already retreated from behind the screen. When she passed through the courtyard of the back hall, there were already 2 streaks of tears on the woman's face. She was still mumbling to herself, He's back. He's finally back. The old mistress went to the Cold Mountain Temple today to pay a visit to an eminent monk with profound dharma. However, it seemed that she didn't see the Rui do. She didn't see the master and returned in disappointment. She didn't expect the old monk to be a famous person. He didn't know whether or not his dharma was profound, but he liked to give empty promises. He promised to copy the scriptures, but all he got was a promise of, I will repay you generously in the future. It was too insincere. Li felt it was a pity that the old monk wasn't in Qing and prefecture. Otherwise, he could have given him a chance to repay him generously. The Rui Du that Master Tan Yin had consecrated, why couldn't he sell it for 10 times the price? Now, he could only wait until the branch of Rui Workshop opened in the capital and then invite him to cut the ribbon to repay the favor. He had even thought of the advertising slogan, Rui Du. Master Tan Yin said it was good after using it. If he painted a charmingly naive bald head on the bottle, it would definitely sell well. Chapter 324. The skinny little girl sat on a big rock at the entrance of the alley, looking at the pedestrians coming and going on the street. She took out a small cloth bag from her bosom, opened it layer by layer, and a faint sweet smell filled the air. It was a small piece of candied plum. The girl carefully tore a small piece from the edge, wrapped the rest, and hid it in her bosom. She placed a small piece of candied plum in her mouth and was reluctant to swallow it. Only when the taste that was sweeter than honey was completely gone did she carefully chew it. She took out the small cloth bag again and repeated the action just now. She had been eating the half piece of candied plum that her mother gave her in the inn like this for a whole day. In his memory, this kind of fragrance could only be smelled at the entrance of a shop called 10 Miles Fragrance. Furthermore, he couldn't be discovered by the shop's employees. They would chase him away while scolding him as little beggar. She was not a beggar. Although she didn't have beautiful new clothes to wear, she always washed her clothes clean, cleaner than all the children she had seen. Customers didn't like a dirty girl in a noodle shop. She didn't like the staff of Ten Li Xiang. They always called her little beggar. She liked the brother she saw yesterday. Because he treated her to delicious food, the next time she saw him, she must treat him to noodles, free of charge. Her grandmother was sick, and her mother didn't go out today, so she definitely wouldn't see that brother today. The little girl was a little disappointed. No one had ever praised her name, except for her mother and uncle. Everyone looked at her strangely. Even her father was no exception. Since the day her father sent her and her mother back to her grandmother's house, she hadn't seen him again. He Duanwu, little beggar. Mother gave birth, no father to teach me. A group of children ran over from a distance, pointing at the girl sitting on the rock, laughing and talking. The girl didn't look at them, sat up, patted the dust off her body, turned around, and walked into the alley. The group of children obviously didn't want her to leave like this, so they sped up, ran over, and surrounded her. She was about to walk out, but was suddenly pushed by an older child on the shoulder, causing her to fall to the ground. He Duanwu, why didn't you clean the table today? Your family doesn't sell noodles? He Duanwu, I saw your father on the street today. The oldest of the children seemed to be 10 years old, and the youngest was only 5 or 6 years old. They were talking one after another. The girl got up from the ground and bit her lip. She wanted to get out of the crowd, but was pushed back in. These years, the He family's life has not been too good. Elderly sighed and said, back then, young master and Miss He left the capital city and embarrassed the house of high dukes. Although the Li family has been declining, they still have a foundation in the capital city. They still have to be careful when they do things, but the He family is different. Missy's father was already seriously ill, and he passed away after a few days. The He family's eldest son was already engaged, but due to the pressure from the House of High Dukes, he quickly came to cancel the engagement. Your other aunt was also delayed for a few years before she was married, but she was sent back by her husband's family in less than 2 years. I'm afraid it's also because of the House of High Dukes. The old man sighed and continued. Fortunately, the He family is just a commoner, and the House of High Dukes won't use more underhanded methods to protect their reputation. The Li family can't help them openly, but they have helped them resolve a lot of trouble in the dark. It's good that young master goes to meet them, and they should know about Miss He's situation. There was an endless stream of people on the street, and elderly told Li Yi about these things in detail. Li Yi could still remember the face of the man who carried him everywhere to seek medical help on a snowy night. There was another figure in his mind that he could not see clearly, and that figure was the person closest to him in this world. Whether it was the Li family or the He family, there wasn't much of a difference in his heart. Their bodies had the same bloodline as this body, and it brought him an irreplaceable sense of closeness. This was something he couldn't feel from Rui and the others. Hey, there used to be a noodle stall here. Why isn't it here today? The chubby boy had been anticipating something along the way, and when he reached the corner of the street, he suddenly said in surprise. There was a hint of disappointment in his voice. He had planned to let his big brother see how delicious this noodle stall was, and also ask him to teach him martial arts. Now, it seemed that his wish had been temporarily dashed. Since yesterday, the chubby boy had obviously been pestering him, and this time, he even wanted to follow him out. Hearing his words, Li raised his head and looked around. The place where he ate the noodles yesterday was empty. The woman and the little girl were gone. But thinking about what happened yesterday, it was normal that they didn't come out to set up a stall today. The mother and daughter looked quite pitiful. If possible, Li wanted to buy the recipe for the noodle stall. Under normal circumstances, a few hundred taels of silver would be enough for a family of 5 to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, even if they ran out of money. One reason was because he really liked the taste of the noodle, and the reason why he was willing to spend several times the price of the noodle recipe was purely because he had an indescribable good impression of the little girl. Young master, the He family is in front. After turning a corner and walking a few dozen steps, Elderly pointed to a deep alley and said, "The He family is in there." Even in the future, even in the most prosperous cities, there would still be old and run-down places, let alone in this era. In the capital, not only did the royal family and various officials and nobles live there, there were also poor families who could not eat their fill in the inner city of the capital. This was clearly a place similar to the slums. When Li and the other two followed a narrow alley, the road ahead was blocked by a group of children. The alley was already narrow, and with 7 or 8 children surrounding it, there was no way to get through. "Little beggar, your father doesn't want you anymore. What's that in your hand? Let us see. Let go. If you don't let go, I'll beat you. What are you doing?" Seeing a young girl being pushed and shoved by them, Li quickly walked over and yelled, "Come on, come on, come on." Seeing that someone had arrived, the naughty brats immediately scattered. The girl picked up a cloth bag from the ground. It had been accidentally dropped by them in the process of fighting over it. She patted the dust off it and carefully kept it in her bosom. Then, she raised her head to look at the figure walking over, and her small face couldn't help but be slightly startled. Li walked over and gently patted the dust off her body and asked, "Duan-Wu, why are you here? Where's your mother?" "My family lives here, and my mother is at home brewing medicine for my grandmother." Seeing that big brother again, the little girl raised her head and said with a smile. With that, she suddenly tilted her head and watched as the little fatty stuffed a fragrant pastry into his mouth. The little fatty blushed under her gaze and handed over the paper bag in his hand and asked, "Do you want to eat, Duan-Wu?" As if remembering something, Li suddenly looked at her and asked, "What's your surname?" "My surname is He Duan-Wu." The little girl raised her head and looked at him with her large, bright eyes as she spoke in a small voice. Chapter 325. Mother, get up and drink your medicine. The woman in the coarse dress brought in a bowl of black medicine and walked to the bedside. She spoke softly to the old woman lying on the bed. Cough, cough. The old woman had a head full of white hair, and her face was full of wrinkles. She stared blankly in front of her and tried to sit up. The woman hurriedly reached out her hand. "Where did you get the money to buy medicine?" The old woman grabbed the woman's hand and stared blankly at the door. At this moment, the woman could clearly see that there was no spirit in her eyes. She must have been blind for a long time. "Business has been good these days, so I saved some money." The woman placed the bowl of medicine next to the old woman's mouth and said. The old woman murmured, "What's the point of wasting this money? This old woman doesn't have many days left to live. It's better to save it for Duan-Wu. Mother, don't say these things anymore. Hurry up and drink your medicine." The woman sighed and urged. She glanced at a jar in the corner of the room. Buried under the jar was the silver that the young master gave her yesterday. After using that money to buy medicine for her mother, there was still more than 9 taels left. If she used it sparingly, it would be enough for a family for a few years. She must not let those people find it. Those 2 young masters were good people. Good people should be rewarded. She silently prayed in her heart that nothing bad would happen to them. The old woman silently drank the medicine. The woman picked up the bowl of medicine. Before she could put it down, a clear voice came from outside the door. "Mother, I'm back." Hearing the girl's voice, the woman's lips curled into a smile. Tomorrow, she would go out and buy a few feet of flowery cloth to make a new dress for Duan-Wu. She had wanted a beautiful flowery dress for a long time. The little girl happily jumped into the room and stuffed a white thing into the woman's mouth. She happily asked, "Mother, is it sweet?" Before she could react, a few figures walked in from outside the door. The woman's expression changed and hurriedly protected the little girl behind her. Could it be that those people had come again? The first thing that came into view was an old face. The woman was slightly startled, and the vigilant expression on her face disappeared. All these years, every time they encountered a problem that they couldn't solve, this old man would appear. Although they had never talked to each other, she could roughly guess his origins. When another familiar face appeared before her eyes, she stood up immediately. Did someone come? The old woman couldn't see, but she could feel that there was an outsider in the house. From the looks of it, it didn't seem to be those villains who often came. Her son worked during the day and only came back at night. She felt strange in her heart. How many years had it been since outsiders came to this house? After Li entered the house, he looked around. It wasn't an exaggeration to use this phrase to describe a family with only 4 bare walls. Other than a stove and a bed, there was no other furniture. There were only 4 walls. The only bed was in the corner, and an old woman with white hair was lying on it. There was also a small room inside, separated by a curtain. Through the gap, one could see some clues. The space was not big, probably only enough for a bed. Benefactor. The woman hurriedly walked over, rubbing her hands. She seemed very nervous. If it wasn't for the young master in front of her, she wouldn't have the money to buy medicine for her mother. Those 10 taels of silver could be considered as the money to save their lives. Ani, Li looked at the woman and said. The woman was about to open her mouth to say something, but suddenly heard the young noble say something. She was startled, her mouth opened halfway, and her expression became blank. He families, Xiaonyang's son. The old man with the surname, Li took a step forward, looked at the woman, and said, "This is your sister's child. Jade Nyang, is Jade Nyang back? Where is Jade Nyang?" Before the woman could react, an anxious voice suddenly came from the room. The old woman was anxious to get off the bed. Because she couldn't see, she tripped and rolled off the bed, but she didn't care at all. She struggled in the direction of the door. "Mother!" the woman exclaimed, and hurriedly ran over to help the old woman up. The old woman stared blankly at the direction of the door. 2 lines of tears rolled down from her empty eyes. She murmured, "My Jade Nyang, where's my Jade Nyang?" The little girl stood there blankly. She didn't know what had happened. It was the first time she saw her grandmother like this. Her face was pale, and she didn't know what to do. "Grandmother, don't worry. Mother is not in the capital. I came this time to take you back." Li didn't know if the old woman would be able to take such a blow if he told her that the Jade Nyang she spoke of had already passed away over 10 years ago. At this time, he could only comfort her like this. As for the truth of the matter, it was better to tell her slowly. After seeing that they had lived in such a place all these years, he could guess what kind of hard life they had lived. Naturally, he couldn't ignore it. Just now, he had already thought of taking them back to Qing and Fu. No matter how long the hands of the nobles in the capital stretched, they couldn't reach Qing and Fu. "You are Jade Nyang's child?" As if thinking of something, the old woman temporarily forgot about the matter of Jade Nyang. She grabbed Li Yi's hand and continuously rubbed her calloused and rough palm on his face. She murmured, "Jade Nyang's child, my grandson, he is so handsome, like Jade Nyang." As the old woman spoke, her voice gradually became softer. She tilted her head and let out a light snore. Great joy and great sorrow were the most hurtful. Li Yi hurriedly helped the old woman to the bed and had her lie flat. After covering her with the blanket, he turned his head and saw that the woman, who was his aunt, was looking at him with a complicated expression. Actually, when he found out that the little girl's name was He Duanwu, Li Yi understood where that familiar and intimate feeling came from, because both of them had half of the He family's blood flowing in them. And the reason why he was familiar with the stall's noodles was probably because he had eaten it when he was young. "And Xiao, pack up. We'll leave today." From Uncle Li, he found out that the youngest daughter of the He family was called He Xiao. Li looked back at the old woman and said, "Okay." Hearing Li Yi's unwavering tone, the old woman opened her mouth and finally spat out a word. Seeing that the little girl was standing there in a daze, Li Yi walked over and rubbed her little head. The old woman followed and looked at the little girl. She said, "Duanwu, this is Big Brother." The little girl nodded mechanically and raised her head to look at Li Yi. Using a mosquito-like voice, she said, "Big Brother." Her little brain still hadn't figured out what had happened, but she knew that this Big Brother was different from the one she had silently called out in her heart. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.